Welcome, everybody, to the Great Northeast BJJ podcast. John Frankl, thanks for joining us early Sunday morning in South Korea. And we got a special guest host tonight, Nate, the librarian Ryan.
I'm
so
back.
Welcome, man. Thank you, guys. And then we got Mohawk Jay, as usual.
As usual, they say at this point.
So, John, it's nice to meet you, man. I've never met you, but you're like Boston BJJ history,
legend.
Man. So, legend. We started this podcast to kind of document the history of Roberto and Boston BJJ, and now it's kind of grown into something else. But every time we've talked to Nate, we've talked to Pat, everybody we've talked to, John Frankl always comes up. So, welcome.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me. My first story, it's kind of sad. Nate's already told it. When I heard Nate tell the story twice, and mine is almost identical. I heard about Boston Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. I went down there. They were on these uncovered foam mats. So, there's like foam little they were like, I think they were for making mattresses or something, but they had no cover on them. They were just duct taped together. So everyone had little like styrofoam things in their hair and all over their gi. But I was watching, there weren't that many people there. I was watching Pat roll, and it's almost basically exactly how Nate describes it. Pat was moving so slowly and so comfortably. I'm like, oh, I can take him. And there were other people. I think there was, so Pat and Joe, is it Joe Best? Was that the other Joe?
Wow.
He was a purple belt. And I was like, oh, I don't know about him. He's like kind of big and strong and fast. And, it was the opposite. I rolling, it's like I felt like I had a chance with Joe Best and I could do nothing with Pat when I joined the next day. And, I think about it today, and it's like, yeah, people probably, the better you are, right? The less you're actually doing, and the less you're moving, and you're not breathing hard or straining. And so, when someone comes in and doesn't know much jiu-jitsu, they probably make the same mistake I did. Yeah, I guess that's just a natural thing, so I don't have to be too embarrassed.
You know what's funny about that is that story about Pat is kind of very widely told. I like, a lot of my guys who have never even rolled with Pat, and I'm like, the story of like the anaconda, the analogy with jiu-jitsu is very true with Pat. It's like the more you move, the more he's got you. And it's almost irrelevant of your style. You know what I mean? Pat has a way of adapting to whatever your jiu-jitsu style is. When we were all new, it was about getting your ass kicked by a guy who seemed like he wasn't even trying, which is funny because the last time I rode with you, John, that's basically how it felt.
It's a goal.
The more I was getting my ass kicked.
No, I think it should be everyone's goal in jiu-jitsu. Jean-Jacques Wichado, I saw it recently, but I saw it for the first time maybe 5 years ago. And he says, you can find it, it's a meme now, I think, but he said, the more I do jiu-jitsu, the less I do. And he said, but you have to know a lot to do a little. And I'm like, okay, it's not the most eloquent way of saying it, but I know exactly what he's saying, right? And that's kind of my goal as well.
It's funny when I saw that meme,
You've seen it, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. And I thought, Jay, you came down, and John, you were here too, but Jay, you came down to Mass BJJ. I forget why we were down there for some celebration. Like Roberto was there, you were there. I think it's in the time when you were around, but I remember these white belts or blue belts were rolling, Jay. And I was standing on the side of the mat with you, and I think Pell was standing there. And you looked at me, and they got up off the mat, and the guy was like, his gi was drenched in sweat. He was dripping. He was breathing. You go, I miss those days. Like, I have hard rolls now, and I'm tired, but I don't roll I don't get off the mat where my gi is dripping, because we had to work. You had to work so hard when you didn't have the technique. You know what I mean? So now we get by being smarter, and it's the right way to do it. but I totally got what you were saying. Like, I miss those days of just like everything you have to fill the hole for what you didn't know, you know? So
I think I'm jealous of those earlier days when it was such an emotional experience to be on the mat because you were so zapped by the end of every class. You know what the funny thing is? Like I thought about this before we got online. I remember the first time I ever met John. We were in the downstairs academy at Boston, which is like, I think if you're old school Boston, that mat, we talked about in the previous podcast, that place was legendary for kind of, kind of like making your chops, you know, in jiu-jitsu with that crowd. It was a tough crowd to survive in. And I knew a little bit of jiu-jitsu, and when I say little, like in context of where we all are now, like it was 0.005%. And there was lockers there, like little lockers, and like John was putting his stuff in the locker next to me. He had this Bowie knife, like this long. And I think I've asked you about how you did this about like a million times. And I was like, what'd you do? He's like, I made this. And, you know, he took a class on blacksmithing and like went and learned how to make blades, and he rolled that day. And I tried to ankle lock him, and the angle was off, and it was really kind of weird. And his hip was kind of turned. And he got out, and then it was like prison rape. And after the match, he was like, you may not even remember this. You're like, hey man, don't try to heel hook me. And I was like, I don't even know what a heel hook is. He's like, yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Like, because I had the ankle and he turned his leg. And so the heel popped in and he kicked my ass. It was like a really valuable lesson. And because of that day, like I'll never forget it. I tell all of my students, I'm like, if you don't know how to properly do this and you don't know how to properly escape, like don't play, just like kind of catch and release. And that's kind of how I think a lot of people play now. But I remember walking away like from the class and getting into the car thinking like, this guy's really smart. He's like kind of like a what's the word? Like a little bit of everything and a lot about something. What do they call that? A Renaissance man. And also don't try to footlock John. That was the first time we ever met.
Sorry.
Dude, it was.
John, when you started in the upstairs, do you remember the year? Like when was that?
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy because it coincides with school. So it would have been 94. Let me make sure that's right. No. 95?
That would probably
maybe.
Be. I think he started.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about it. I think it was 95, yeah.
And so you had come from California. You started.
Yeah, so I started absolutely in 94. So I did a year in California. Oh yeah. So my background for jiu-jitsu is I had been doing all these other martial arts my whole life. Felt pretty proficient, trained hard, but you know, it wasn't that I didn't train hard. It was that the systems themselves weren't very realistic. And
for context, this was another time. That's back to say that. At the time we were all doing what we thought was.
Oh no, my intentions were totally pure, right? It was just lack of access, right?
Right.
I mean, there were probably when I was first exposed, there were 2 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu places outside of Brazil. It was Hawaii and LA. That was it. You know, Horian and Helsinki. That whole split with the Machados and Hickson hadn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I had a buddy training in Hawaii. He showed me some of it. I was completely impressed. And this is 1989. So I was like, wow, I got to do that. But I was living in Korea, going to graduate school. And so, you know, I got the Horian's VHS tapes and kind of played around with friends over there, but didn't get formal instruction. So I finished my master's degree and moved back. And so I moved back, immediately moved to LA and did a year with Hicks. And that's where I got my blue belt, and I was in Boston for school. And then there was a little gap. Roberto wasn't advertising.
Yeah.
There was like if I showed up in September, I probably didn't get to Roberto's until November, December. I don't remember. But for a couple months, I was putting up flyers around school, and Mike Wenzel saw a flyer, and he had trained. He got his blue belt from Helsinki in Hawaii. He did his undergrad in Hawaii, and he was going to law school. And so Mike calls me, and then Mike and I are training just in, random wrestling mats, cool. And then I somehow, asking around, found out about Roberto. And then I went one day without Mike, and I told him, like, oh, it's good, let's go. And I brought Mike down, and we just joined. Yeah.
Oh, you're the one that brought Mike in. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. We were rolling around on school wrestling mats for a couple of months before I even knew Roberto existed.
Did you find him on the website?
There was no website.
Not have it, because Craig Baum built that. And it's funny, you were talking, and I was wondering how you ended up finding him, because
word of mouth, just other martial artists around Boston. Someone knew. Yeah.
Hashtag, like, literally the greatest website ever. Like, the most fun I've ever had on one website.
Yeah.
John, could we take a step back, like, to your initial, like, you got your blue belt from Hickson. So many of us, like, we go through the same rigmarole as far as, starting jiu-jitsu, the experience and everything like that. Did you, like, when you hear or when you have your students, like, do you think your experience from white to blue was different than a lot of people might have had because it was Hickson, because of his, like, he obviously has very high standards and he's a legend in jiu-jitsu. What was that like?
Yeah, so he, realistically, I saw him maybe twice a week. He was really involved in his own training. It wasn't like I took 6 classes a week directly from Hickson. And even when he was there, like, if he was there twice a week, maybe he taught one class, and I remember he'd ride in on his bike. He was just training all the time. So he'd ride his bike, and he'd get there, and, Luis was my main instructor. He was a brown belt at the time. He's in Maui now.
Heredia?
Yeah. And, sometimes if Hickson got there early, he would teach the class, but oftentimes, the class was already ongoing, and he would just sort of walk around, say hi to everyone. He was really friendly, and he would point things out. Like, I remember doing some like, when you're trying to, you're warming up and you're doing some bridging, and then you bridge to one side, and then you bridge to one side and kind of thread the needle and pull your foot underneath. And I remember as a white belt, him just, like, walking around the mat, and I was probably stepping over, which everyone does at first. It's kind of it's not natural to pull your leg through the bottom, and he just pointed that out to me. There were things like that, even when he wasn't teaching. And I think the standards were high, but it was also kind of disorganized in a good and bad way. I think later he came up with a curriculum, but there was no curriculum. It was kind of like, you had to have private lessons before you could go into group class, and there was no guarantee how, it could be like you only need 2 months, it could be a year, but whoever was giving you privates, and that time was Luis, was a brown belt, there was Mauricio and Jason, and they were purple belts. And I got with Luis. Other people were working with Mauricio and Jason, but I was doing 1.5 hour private lesson a week. And that was still $160 a month. That's 26 years ago. I didn't have that. It was all the money I could scrape together eating ramen and rice and beans and stuff. I wanted to do this really badly. So now, as a quick aside, when people, like, tell me they don't have money for jiu-jitsu while they check their brand new iPhone and drive away in their brand new BMW, I can't deal with it. That's part of the reason I stopped running an academy myself, because the whole jiu-jitsu and money thing didn't work for me. Sorry. So yeah, it was disorganized in a good way, because it was like, you couldn't just tick the boxes and get a belt. Like, oh, all your techniques, and you've paid me for a couple of years, so I'm going to give you a belt. It was kind of like, start with privates with no guarantee that you'll ever get into the group class. Then come into the group class and train really hard with no belt tests or anything. And one day, I still remember exactly how it happened. I was training with a blue belt, had him in my closed guard, got a wrap over his arm to the lapel, and finalized him with a choke. And then class was over. Luis walks up to me, pulls a blue belt out of he's hiding a blue belt in his gi. He pulls it out, and he's like, "Good job, man, you're blue belt." I'm like, oh, "Okay, thanks, man, I'm a blue belt." That was it. So super informal, but super performance based. It wasn't like you haven't been here long enough or you don't know enough of this. It's like, oh wow, you just tapped that blue belt and you've been training a while, and he just decided to give it to me. Yeah.
So was that Hickson's academy?
Yeah, on Pico, his first one when he left Horian.
How long had he been?
It was a karate school with hardwood floors. And before every jiu-jitsu class, we folded out the mats, the accordion mats, and after every class, we folded them up. Never sterilized them even once, of course. But yeah, it was a karate school. But those guys trained like Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 to 9, and the rest of the time was empty, right? And so Rickson basically took all the other hours.
Is that where you kind of like have that? So I really admire, one of the things I admire about you is that you kind of, you have the freedom and the open mind to train with a lot of different folks, right? You've got your SBG affiliation, obviously you're a Boston black belt, started with Rickson, and you have this pretty close-knit relationship with Henry Akins. Was that based on the first introduction with Rickson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, or did that start later?
No, we pieced it back together, and we did overlap, but we didn't know each other at the time. I think I may have been there a few months before him, and I may have left right around the time that he was really starting to live in the academy and work there, because I don't remember him being like there. I think eventually he was like a manager, secretary, like did all the things. I think that was probably after I left, and the business side of it kind of got more organized. I just remember Luis doing all that. So it was more, but that connection mattered, right? That Rickson DNA, we were able to connect. We knew all the same people. And so it was like, it was like if I met someone from Boston right now, and like we didn't overlap at all, right? But it's like, oh yeah, I trained with Roberto or Nate or Pat or you, there's an I don't have to have known him at the time to have like an automatic connection and trust, right?
Right.
So we have that.
So what brought you east?
Going to grad school. And I got into UCLA, and I was very, very tempted to just stay at Rickson's and study there. But I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. There are, Boston, Brazil, I would say going to Boston is probably, was better for my jiu-jitsu in some ways. And that's not to say in all ways, right? Rickson is Rickson, right? And it was more organized back then. They had a head start. They had a big head start. But, there was a lot of, Boston was interesting. There was a lot of freedom. I'm glad that I had my blue belt, and I'm glad I had like really solid fundamentals, because Roberto was more like, let's Gracie Baja style. He would be showing really advanced stuff, kind of out of order. Some days it'd be really fundamental, some days it'd be really advanced. There wasn't that real compounding structured curriculum. And so, yeah, in some ways I probably got exposed to a lot of things earlier than I otherwise would have. So it worked out. I'm super glad I did it.
So how did you find Boston originally?
Just word of mouth. I was training with Mike Wenzel, and there were some other people. I was doing some kickboxing, and someone was like, "Oh, you're doing kickboxing, but you're doing grappling. Have you heard of?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't know there was any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu." I knew about Joe Maffei out in Watertown. Was it Waltham? Sorry, out in Waltham.
Waltham.
But that was just, his style was not right for me, and he was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in addition to a lot of other kooky stuff. And so, and I like Joe. I've never really met him, but like online, we were cordial and stuff. But I didn't think I really wanted to do that. And so, yeah, eventually someone mentioned it, and I'm like, no, I've never heard of this. And then I went in, and I met Roberto the first day. He was super cool, and I think if looking back on it, he might have been a little bit wary of people coming in. He wanted to. He didn't want any weirdos just coming in there, and so it was like there was an initial moment, and I don't know if I caused it by asking too many questions or benching Rickson too early or whatever, but there was like a couple uncomfortable moments, but literally moments once he realized that I wasn't there to do that, and I was asking him how I could sign up and everything. I was was there training the next day. It's been great ever since.
How many people were training in Boston when you showed up? Like in a class?
On any given day?
Yeah.
10 to 15, I would say. Sometimes 20. The first room wasn't that big. Like the mats weren't covered and the room wasn't that big. It was a karate school, and like the one that Hickson rented from, it's like Roberto was doing the same thing. It's like, oh, you have this karate school, but you only use it, 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week or whatever. Why don't I make some classes in the other hours? And so I don't think you guys were talking about last time. It was another Joe. I don't remember his last name. It was a small blonde-haired kid, but he let Roberto do that. But I don't think he had rented that much space because he didn't have that many students. So it wasn't big like when we moved downstairs.
Most everybody was white belt, or
yes.
But Pat was a purple belt.
Yeah, Pat and Joe were purple belts. Yeah, mostly white belts. Mike and I had blue belts, but from other places. Yeah.
What? So you had a pretty extensive martial arts background before you started jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
So what other arts have you studied, and kind of what was that?
Well, when I was a kid, like young, like neighborhood. I was in a pretty small town, so there weren't that many options. So neighborhood karate school, and then when I went to college, started taking it really seriously. Because like in high school, I was swimming and playing water polo and doing all this stuff, and so when those seasons would come around, I would be lazy about martial arts. In college, I had no chance of playing any sport. I don't know, bowling or something, but I went to try to walk onto the water polo team, I remember, and I looked at them and I'm just like, okay, this has got to be the basketball team because you're all like 6'9", huge. Like, no, this is the water polo team, and I'm just like, okay, I will
see you guys later.
I'll study. I don't think I'm gonna. It was like probably jumping to the pros because there's no pro water polo. So I started doing Korean martial arts, Kuk Sool Won, which is like basically Hapkido style. And like Nate said, I was doing it for the right reasons because their advertisement was like, oh, we do kicking and punching and grappling and ground fighting. It turned out to the techniques and the training methods were not realistic, but the advertisement of it was, and you don't really figure that out for a long time either. There was no UFC, and they have their ways, not like evil, but they just have their customary ways of keeping you waiting. I think all martial arts do that to a point. And then when I was really in the middle of that, basically I was feeling that it wasn't realistic enough, so I didn't quit it because I had a really close relationship with my instructor. But I started cross-training in Muay Thai, and I started cross-training in Filipino martial arts. And then, by the time I graduated and I was going to Korea, I was pretty much, more or less, getting ready to be done with that. And then after the year in Korea, when I met my buddy in Hawaii, that kind of sort of ended that chapter and began, looking for the chance to train jiu-jitsu formally, training, by video. But there was availability at that time of Muay Thai and Filipino martial arts, so I kept doing that.
So that was your original trip to Korea, right?
Second, I went for a summer the year before just to check it out. I was going to go for a year abroad, junior year abroad, and my dad said, "A year? What if you hate it?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point." He's like, "Why don't you go the summer before?" So I was there about 6 weeks in the summer of '87, and then I went for a year. 88, 89. But yeah, the first time that I could say I lived there, here.
So
why'd you pick Korea?
Right.
I think it was partly martial arts, because I was really heavily involved in Korean martial arts at the time. But that was probably most of it. It was kind of random though, because I originally, when I took Korean language class, it was a graduation requirement, and I really had it in my head that I would do it for a year and then quit. But I liked it, and I did it another year and such. So, that's how it went down.
But it's interesting because obviously Korea has become a pretty substantial part of your life.
Yeah.
For any of you guys listening, what John probably wouldn't say himself is that he brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Korea. And obviously
he says that every day to me.
Was that Nate?
He brings that up every day. What are you talking about?
So, like, what was it, about Korea that obviously the initial interest was martial arts, but like obviously there's a love there and there's a connection there.
Yeah, that took a long time though. I mean, it's funny. I've left Korea, permanently 3 or 4 times. So I remember vividly coming back from that first year, 88, 89. My dad picked me up at the airport, San Francisco. He said, "How'd you like it?" And I remember exactly what I told him. I said, "I liked it. I mean, I'm glad I did it, but I'm never going back to Korea." And I believed it. I was kind of burnt out. It was my first time to be away from home for a year. Korea was super kind of rough and anti-foreign at the time. They were going through their own, transformations. And I really believed it. And then, 6 months later, I was back here, but then I left. I mean, I feel very comfortable now. I've been here about 15 years straight, except for that sabbatical year when I was in Boston with you guys. But basically, I've been at my job for 15 years. I like my job. My wife and daughter are super comfortable here. But that took 3 different times of like coming back to America and being like, okay, Korea's out of my system. I'm just going to live in America. And at the time I really believed that. So it wasn't just automatic either.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like kind of where you left off at Boston, which is like that downstairs time. Cause that's where, like as Jay said, I think that's where a lot of people really have those memories. And you kind of said it, there was a freedom for all of us. Roberto was kind of heading the ship, but kind of let us find our path in jiu-jitsu. And there were some really talented people coming from all over New England. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts, like from the beginning of you going in and all the people that we trained with there, just kind of your story there,
Yeah. I mean, the upstairs, like I said, it was just kind of rough and tumble up there. And then by the time we moved down, it didn't take that long because he was growing pretty quickly. And we just, we had enough people and a need for more space. And so, yeah, by the time we were down there, it was bigger, cleaner, more organized. And, it's like a virtuous cycle. You have a bigger, cleaner space and you attract more people. And I think the website and the popularity of jiu-jitsu through the UFC everything was just growing at that time. And then not only the UFC, like Japan got really huge all of a sudden, right? And Hickson was fighting Japan, and those events were really good. So you had this American-based show and a Japan-based show, and there was just a lot of momentum and energy flowing into jiu-jitsu. So, yeah, I mean, I was there. I don't know the exact order. It was, at that point, it's like Pat and Joe were already there. Then Mike and I came. I don't know who would have been the next wave. Like, when did you come back to Boston, Nate? Like, when did you graduate and start permanent? Because you would come up and train on vacation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. It's hard for me.
When did you graduate Kansas? That would have been like the
90.
definitive.
Yeah, but I was 98.
So you were probably in and out from 96 or something when you'd come back, or 95, right?
Yeah.
So you were early.
Kenny and Keith were there when I was there. Like I remember them there. I remember
they were already there because they came pretty early, and they had trained a little bit with Hoyce.
Yeah, they were in their basement at that point.
Yeah, they didn't live out in LA, but I think they went out there for like a week and trained with Hoyce, and they were probably doing what I was doing with the videos, and they were both good athletes anyway, right? College level soccer players and stuff. So, that helps too. Like if you're already pretty athletic and you're young and you're motivated, those
Dr. Florian was a black belt in judo, and he was teaching.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
But I have to say, if you go back and look at the first set of tapes from Horian, you could learn a decent amount. And I don't mean like hundreds of sweeps or anything, but what you could learn what you really needed. And that was, I think, this is an aside, but I think it's important because I'll forget it if I don't say it right now. I remember coming up in Boston, but the whole jiu-jitsu world, there was this thing where, you know, Rorion is hiding techniques and Horion's holding people back because, you know, the Machados would come up and they'd show people a bunch of like spider guard, and Rorion would be like, don't show them that. Or someone would come up and start showing the new stuff from Brazil, and Rorion would be, don't show them that. And I just kind of took it at face value at the time. But again, having, you know, done this now for 26 years and looking at Hidon and Henner, you know, who are trained by Rorion, and looking at Henry Aiken's material, I'm like, I really think that he had a philosophy, which is like, you don't need to do that. And you're abandoning all of these techniques that work to do things that you don't need. And I really trust his philosophy now, you know. And I can't get in his head and say why he did it. And if he didn't have some, you know, desire to monopolize jiu-jitsu and things like that, that could very well be true. But in terms of like, well, I'll just go back to like rolling with Pat back in the day, or rolling with Henry even these days. They're not doing anything that I don't know, and they're not doing anything that I probably didn't learn at white belt, maybe blue belt. And that it's not about, oh man, I've never seen that, you tricked me. It's like, no, they're like, I hadn't been Americana in a decade, or maybe more, maybe 15 years since I had been Americana, and Henry will Americana me 3 times in 5 minutes. And I'm just like, you know, that's what Rorion was aiming at, right? Like, you don't need, if everything else is dialed in, you don't need much more than, you know, straight arm lock, Americana, rear naked choke, guillotine. It's like, that's all those guys do, but you can't stop it, you know?
Right. And
is it because of timing?
Pressure with Henry.
Pressure with
Henry, it's pressure. Of timing is important always, because if you can't miss the opportunity. But what exposes me with Henry is always pressure. With Pat doesn't have Henry's pressure. Pat's more like Pat had a smoother game where like he just wouldn't let you be where you wanted to be or do what you want to do with kind of and I think it's backward. Like Pat himself, I think, did a lot of Chinese martial arts, a lot of kung fu, and he had that kind of very soft style. So they're different.
Pat was always digging something, and you knew it, and you had to address it. And in addressing it, you open yourself up for something else. That was always my feel with him that I tried to take. You know, like I could never do that, and it kills me because I'd make fun of him for doing Chinese push hands. You know, I'm like, well, you're doing this, and then one day he's like doing pummeling in. I'm like, how come I can never pummel? And he's like, the Chinese push hand stuff, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said anything.
To this day, the importance that I drive with my guys about gripping and being really competitive about putting your hands on someone else and establishing grips, that all comes from Pat. And I always say to my guys that, you know, Pat never beats you with anything that a blue belt doesn't know.
Yeah.
And like you talked about Hidon and Henner, and like a lot of jiu-jitsu guys, I was skeptical about kind of Horion's kind of lineage and his kids, because of all the crap that goes around, and like, you know, you mean, stories happen, and if you don't know the truth, then all stories is all you have, right?
Yeah.
And then I saw Hidon fight Galvão. Now, if you go by, you know, traditional jiu-jitsu rules, he got crushed. Like I was like 1,000,000. But how easily he was able to evade being submitted and being in really bad spots. I was like, well, at the time, Galvão was probably the best in the world as far as IBJJF is concerned. And Hidon was able so easily I'm going to replace guard calmly. You know what I mean? I'll replace guard. And I felt like as the match went on, the better he did again, I never saw Hidon do anything that we weren't taught as white belts or blue belts. He just was so proficient in the way that he demonstrated his jiu-jitsu. I remember walking away from that match being like, these guys are pretty legit. And I got to tell you, John, like, you know, you're constant like saying, hey, I've been to these guys' academy, like they're really legit. And now I kind of pay really close attention to what they're doing. The quality of the jiu-jitsu is super, super high. And it's kind of an element of jiu-jitsu that I think a lot of sports schools have forgotten.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I'll do you one better. I can say with like, it's counterfactual. It didn't happen, but I'm 99.9% certain if it was just, we're going to go till someone quits or taps, Ryron would have tapped him. Galvao was tired. He was running from him by the end. Ryron was getting better. I mean, honestly, if it was no points, submission, and this can take 3 hours like back in the day, yeah. I think, and that was 20 minutes. It's not hard to play that film out to 30 and 40 minutes, you know?
Right.
Because Galvao had all his shots, and it couldn't make anything work. And Ryron was just getting started. So, yeah, I mean, it was super cool to watch.
He was smiling. Like,
oh, dude.
10 minutes in, you could tell Galvao was sweating, and he was tired, and he was tired of trying to, you know, he's accustomed to a 10-minute match. You know what I mean?
And mentally kind of broken, too. You know, how frustrated he was in the interview, right? And once Ryron was in his head like that, and he's getting tired, I think he would have caught him.
Right. But, a beautiful demonstration of jiu-jitsu, in my opinion.
Yeah. So if you're to fast forward a little bit, everyone's training together in the downstairs. I was trying to piece together kind of the years and stuff. So there's a bunch of jiu-jitsu tournaments. And then the next thing I think of with you is you have that fight with Nuri. But I think a lot before that was, and I talked about this a little bit with that last one, was the MMA team starting up at Boston BJJ, and like Pat running the ground stuff, you teaching the striking.
Yeah, that was super fun.
And that was I was saying this in the last one, like that was an amazing time. Like you had that base in Muay Thai before. I mean, we all had done a little bit of karate or something, but here's John kicking everyone's legs out, punch him in the face, and he's good at jiu-jitsu. And John's good wrestling, especially for when we were training back then. I don't know. You want to talk about that a little bit? Like as we started the MMA stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's funny. Like when I started jiu-jitsu, that's all I thought it was, right? The only jiu-jitsu I'd ever seen was UFC. So like that's jiu-jitsu. And I remember at Hickson's, like I had been training 2-3 months and then never put on a gi. And then Louis, probably because I started in the summer, and then Luis is like, oh man, you're going to have to get a gi. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll get a gi. I mean, Hickson was, because I had finished school in Korea, moved back to America. That would have been like June. And then I probably stayed with my family in Santa Cruz for like a week or two just to say hi to everyone. And I'm like, but I'm going to LA. And I packed up and I was probably in LA by whenever, late June. And yeah, it was like, we were all no gi until around September. And then also like, I remember posture from the guard. Like I'm in your closed guard, and the way they taught posture, it was like, it's exactly, all the mechanics were the same. But now people will say like, look, if you're here, it's like they can't armbar you and they can't choke you. And then it was like, look, I can't punch you in the face. I mean, that was like how people were teaching. Luis is like, if you're in proper posture, like, and I'm trying to reach your face, I shouldn't be able to reach your face with a punch. I'm like, okay. So that was just what jiu-jitsu was for me. And so, you know, get to Boston, and there was a little less of that, but not much. So even before we started that team, I mean, Roberto, I still remember he'd put boxing gloves on one person and say, try to, you can't do jiu-jitsu, but you can try to punch this guy in the face. And then it's like the other person, it's like, you can't punch him back, but you have to clinch and take him down. And we'd do rounds of that, right? And then we'd have the battle royals where there was no punching, but it was like, could be 3-on-1. And, just, you had to deal with whatever happened. And so that was, jiu-jitsu was, I didn't know there was such thing as a jiu-jitsu tournament the first year I trained, basically. No one talked about it at Hickson's. The only thing they talked about was him getting ready to fight Vale Tudo in Japan. Nobody was doing tournaments. And there may have only been like 1 or 2 a year, right? I mean, Joe Moreira had something, and maybe the Machados did something. I don't know. But there was no IBJJF, and there was no tournament scene at all. So, it's why I started in the first place, and I'd already done a lot of other stuff. And so, when Roberto had a bigger space and no classes on Fridays, that was just his schedule. So I think, Pat and I just asked, well, can we just open a like a MMA class on Fridays? And Roberto's like, yeah, of course. There's nothing else going on. And so it was pretty natural. And of course we were already doing that privately in the back room, not as a class, but now it was like, okay, this is for people who want to do this. And they knew that, don't bring your gi, you have, and you need a cup and a mouthpiece. And we probably, like everybody, we probably went a little too hard. Like if I had to do over again, I think we'd be a lot more scientific about it. But I would say it's better to be perfect. But if you're going to be imperfect, I would rather err on the side that we went to intensity than err on the side of like, oh no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. Because at that point, it's a voluntary class. People are there for a reason. And, if the training's a little bit rough, I think that's okay. I don't remember anyone really getting seriously injured either.
No.
Yeah. There was a guy in one of those classes. I don't know if you remember this guy at all. I'm not sure. He might have gotten a blue belt at some point. He's about 250 pounds. His name was Sasha. And Sasha,
he came out of team. He was from the Team Elite guys.
Yeah, and Sasha was John had tapped him a number of times. Well, why don't we go strikes? And you could Sasha was a little amped up about it. John, it was like someone asked John to play chess. He was like, yeah, all right, we can do that. We can do that. And they put the gloves on, and John never hurt him. Just put him in a bunch of positions and was kind of slapping him in the head and little, never hurt him at all. But I was as a white belt, I'm sitting on the side of the mat and watching this. I'm like, holy shit, they're hitting each other. And here's John. I don't know what you weighed at the time. Maybe between 170 and 180 pounds would be my guess at the time. And here's Sasha 250. And John is just dominating this guy. And eventually, because you wouldn't submit him. I remember that. You were determined to make this round last as long as you wanted it to last. And eventually Sasha's like, all right, I'm just done. I'm just couldn't move anymore, flat on his back, huffing and puffing. And I think about that. I was thinking about that time, because at the time I knew nothing about jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? I'm a new guy. I'm as green as they get. But I do remember those times in that downstairs academy being pretty intense with training as for jiu-jitsu and MMA. But the jiu-jitsu, it wasn't, it's such a contrast to what you see in academies nowadays. People want to build their academy and have 1 million members, right? I don't think Roberto cared about that. I think what he wanted was hard training, and he wanted good people. And it made that pretty tough, and you were at the forefront of that, right?
He certainly, yeah. I mean, he always kept, I think, at least when I was there, it may have gone back and forth. He always kept a day job, right? He was always doing building and things like that. And that could have been part of it, not wanting to be completely financially dependent on that and having to lower his standards or accept people that, he didn't want in the academy. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, those things, they happen less now, right? But they still happen. It's like that's really what attracted me to jiu-jitsu, is that's possible. I don't think that's quite as possible if you just have two guys swinging at each other, right? I mean, it's not impossible, but it's much more likely that one person who's big and strong will get lucky, even if he has no technique, or on the other hand, it's much more likely that in order to control him, the smaller, better person will actually have to hurt him and injure him, right? Yeah, break his nose or something.
Right. It's interesting when, I think about kind of all of our different reasons for kind of getting into this thing. And my circle, I kind of think of the cloud of John Frankl is it's pretty complex, right? So you have a lot of interests, right? You speak multiple languages. You went to Harvard. You're a blacksmith. You make soju at home. Big into leather work these days. Jiu-jitsu, MMA, all of those pieces. Like, was jiu-jitsu a part of kind of like the concept of kind of where you wanted to take your life, or did you just kind of happen upon it? And now when you look back on it, does it fit in with all of these other things, or is it mutually exclusive?
So yeah, martial arts, like I said, I was kind of attracted since I was young, and the more opportunities I had, the more I kind of expanded what I was doing. I mean, the straight answer to that is, and I've thought about this a lot lately, I'm pretty sure, and I told my daughter this because she's going off to college next year, I'm pretty sure I have some form of ADHD. Honestly, like I was always like acting up when I was in third grade, and my parents were getting called and everything. Just too much energy, and it's like that's a really bad thing when you're 10 years old or even in high school, because you're supposed to focus on everything, even the 80% of it that you don't like and aren't interested in. It's very hard. Now, fast forward that to, college, and you can work on the things that you want to work on a little bit more. And then, and then your life in general, I think, I still have it, but a kind of energy, but since I'm only compelled to do what I want to do, it's a positive, right? So like I do wind up doing a lot of things. I don't have a plan to do them. I don't think I need to do them. Like, it's not like, oh, Jay won't think I'm a Renaissance man if I quit brewing or something. I got to like juggle all these things to keep my image. No, like leather is the most recent. It was just like, man, I'm interested in that. Let's give it a try. And if it was boring, I would have quit, right? No one's making me do it. It's costing me time and energy and money. It's not like it's not my job. I just like it, and so I keep doing it. So yeah, it's kind of I think I have a lot of energy, and when I can channel it to where I want it to be, like I want to do jiu-jitsu, and like right now with lockdown, jiu-jitsu is kind of on the back burner. So I wind up doing more yoga and kettlebells and things like that, things that I feel like relate to jiu-jitsu and will keep me on track for when I go back. And I wind up doing a lot of things, but I don't have a plan, and I don't have a philosophy that says I'd be a loser if I only did one thing. It's just I'm doing exactly what I want and exactly how much of it that I want, if that makes sense.
It does to me, like 100%. I think at the essence of every person, there's free will here. You don't have to do anything in your life that you don't want to do. Literally, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to when you think about it. Now, there's things we should do. You know what I mean? But we don't like, and it seems like, you've crafted your lifestyle around the things that you enjoy, and like, you know what I mean? You more deliberately than most, I would say.
Yeah. And the people who are narrowly focused don't always get it either. Like I'll have people at school and they'll say, oh, if you would, just dedicate all your time here, you could, be so much more famous at school. And then, maybe some people in jiu-jitsu would think like, oh, if you would just own an academy, you could train all day and, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't fault those people, but, I see a lot of people around me who are super narrowly focused, and they don't seem that happy to me. So like school is a good one, because people say like, oh, Professor X is so wonderful. He or she, right, has, 4 books and 38 articles and this prize and that research grant. And like, I'm so jealous. And then I look and it's like, yeah, divorced 3 times, obese, alcoholic, kids won't talk to him. It's like, that's not a good life. Like it's like you sacrifice everything to be a star. And then the same thing with martial arts. Like in Korea, a lot of guys come out of judo and wrestling you know, and I know these guys through jiu-jitsu and MMA and stuff. And these guys, like when they were 18 to 25, they're like, you know, gold medal in the Olympics, world championships, this and that. But it's like physically and mentally, they're broken. Like they have all these injuries, and even the ones without a lot of injuries, they don't want to ever wrestle again. They don't ever want to do judo again. They've totally burnt out. Like they did 70 years of judo in 10 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
they're like, I never want to see judo again. I just think of it as pressure and people beating me into training and you know, getting up and work, you know, taking drugs to train while I had a knee injury and F that, and I never want to do it again. So like I also like the balance I have in my life.
It's you hit like an awesome point on the concept of like what is success really, right? And you look at someone in one aspect and but if you look a little bit deeper, you can see, you know, a myriad of mistakes and, you know, lack of attention to some things that really matter. And so what makes me think about that is that like your drive to teach. And I think a lot of people that teach jiu-jitsu do it for a lot of the wrong reasons. It might be, you know, notoriety or money. And, you know, the essence of I think of why you want to train is kind of, yeah, it's like, it seems like self-evolution for your own jiu-jitsu, but what drives you to teach? Because obviously you didn't like the idea of owning the academy, but you spend a lot of time doing jiu-jitsu still. You spend a lot of time teaching. Like, what's your drive?
I love jiu-jitsu. I love it more now than I have ever. I mean, it gets better every day. I get better every day. It's a weird thing. I was watching a Hidon Gracie interview yesterday, 2 days ago. And he said something that I've been saying a long time. He's like, he knows he's like way better than he was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And then he stopped, because I always do the same thing. He stopped and he's like, I'm not saying that like I could run faster than my 10-year younger self or bench press more. Like physically physically we're not getting stronger once we hit a certain point, and we're not getting faster once we hit a certain point. But like I have zero doubt that I would beat, not easily, but not with that much difficulty, myself of 10 years ago in jiu-jitsu. Even though I know that, you know, in other numbers, myself of 10 years ago would be like better endurance or a little bit stronger or whatever. And that keeps me going. You know, that jiu-jitsu is so deep and so technical that I don't, you know, there's going to be a point. I'm not saying this is going to happen when I'm 85 years old, but I'll be 53 in a couple weeks, and I don't see that end point yet, right? It doesn't feel like it's going to happen next year. I mean, I feel like this is going to go for a while, and that's super awesome. It just motivates me.
How has how you train changed, like as you get older?
Yeah, I look like I'm taking a nap most of the time now. Like, are you talking about like training for jiu-jitsu or like rolling?
Both. Like, you know, how do you roll with everybody? Yes. No matter size, weight?
Yes.
Do you have a different plan, you know, is your game plan in a roll differently than how it used to be?
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'll have macro goals, like for my jiu-jitsu over the next 6 months, what I want my jiu-jitsu to do, but I have no micro goals in a roll. Like I don't go into a roll needing to sweep someone, needing to submit someone, needing someone not to pass my guard. It's like everything is jiu-jitsu. So most often I just let people pass my guard, start in like side control bottom. If they want to mount, I start in mount bottom, and just get super comfortable in all positions, because it's all jiu-jitsu. But then
I was just going to say, I am right when he asked you, what is your jiu-jitsu like? I can picture you sitting down, closing your eyes, letting the person get to side control or mount. This is exactly what I'm thinking with John. And the person's like going, what does he do? And then it gets good, just wherever you want to get. Then they start going, and then John starts going.
That's what it is. Because otherwise, you know, I don't want to sit there and like grip fight for 3 minutes of a 5-minute round. Like you can't grab my collar, or, or just hold closed guard for 7 minutes or something. It's like, I feel like if I can hold closed guard and break someone down 3 times in a row, just like slaughter their posture, then I just open my guard, right? Because if I can do it 3 times, I can probably do it 300 times. And then I'm not benefiting. They're certainly not benefiting. Or if I can be like, okay, you can't pass my guard for 30 seconds, then you probably can't pass my guard, right? So then it's like, let's work from side control. I just kind of let things, I want as much exposure to every position that could happen in a fight as possible. Not like, oh, I need to just mount and like put my chest in their face for 5 minutes, which I would do in a fight, by the way. But we're training, right? So I want everything to happen. I want exposure to everything, and and I also want to disadvantage myself. Now there are guys who are active competitors, right? And I don't give them anything because they don't need me to give them anything. We just roll and I try not to tap, to those guys. They're like really good, guys who are winning IBJJF championships. So it depends a little bit on the person in front of me.
I think that it's really interesting, the concept of how your ego changes as you get more experienced in what we're doing. I think there's a real art to letting one of your students submit you and not letting them feel like you gave it to them, right? Like you worked and like, you know what I mean? And to your point, with a lot of competitors and things like that, the training as we get older changes. And I'm really interested in your perspective. You're in great shape. You're 50 plus, there's no sign of you slowing down with your training. Like I've tried to compete a lot in the last couple of years. And my body is like, what the fuck? And a close friend of ours, told me, he's like, hey, like there's a point where I couldn't tie my shoes. You know what I mean? I couldn't open doors. I couldn't, I was training so hard for competitions that, my body was just getting wrecked. I'm like, I don't see myself on the mat at 75 behaving this way. And this is like a balance that I'm really struggling with recently, is that I'm like you. I believe my jiu-jitsu is better than it's ever been. And I'm like, I really like the competing, but training for it is brutal. And I want to be on the mat when I'm 75. Like, are you working with your students and with people that like the community, me, Nate, George, like how do you guide people through that process? Because I feel more lost now with that balance than maybe I ever have.
Okay, so I can't force anyone to do anything. My best guy in terms of IBJJF and Abu Dhabi medals is one of my most broken physically. He's still under 30. He does berimbolo all the time, so he's got like lower back and neck issues, the impingement on his nerves. He's like really fit, but you can see on the left side his pec and his arm are smaller, like visually, not a doctor's examination, like, oh, it's 2% smaller. Just he takes off his shirt and with the naked eye, you're like, oh, it's like 15% smaller. Because, the nerves aren't getting to those muscles. I mean, and I've been telling him forever what he needs to do, but that's all I can do. I mean, I'm not his father or anything. And even if I were, I couldn't make him do it. But, I give people my philosophy, and, that's as far as I can go. I can't really force them to act on it.
So what is your philosophy?
Jiu-jitsu is a martial art of self-defense, and what good does it do you if you can beat up all these other people, but you're the one hurting yourself? Like, he doesn't need anyone to mug him, right? He doesn't need someone to break his arm. He's hurting his own arm. He's hurting his own neck. He's hurting his own back. He's ruining his own life. So that's not self-defense. And what happens in jiu-jitsu these days, there's a bait and switch. It's like, oh, this is the best art for self-defense, which I believe is true. And then you get there and it's like, let me show you the berimbolo and go fight in a bunch of tournaments, which has nothing to do with that, right? And so there's a switch like that. The tournaments are fine for the people who want to do them. but only in so much as there's an expression of jujitsu as a martial art of self-defense, but that's not the way it is anymore. It's that you're the one attacking and injuring yourself in order to fight in these tournaments, which are completely artificial. And another thing is, if I had a student who was a NFL football player or a heavyweight boxer or something, and he's like, "Coach, I know philosophically you're right, but I'm going to take steroids and mess up my shoulders and my knees, and they're going to pay me $250 million. I'd be like, well, yeah, that's kind of a rational choice. Like, I might do it for $250 million. In jiu-jitsu, you get a free fucking gi. They don't even pay. They don't even give you money. They don't even give you a plane ticket. It's ridiculous. Maybe your seminar enrollment will increase a little bit or something. It's ridiculous to ruin your body, like to actually injure yourself for the art of not letting other people injure you, for nothing.
It's I think you put a post on the might have been on the Underground or might have been the Boston, this just popped into my head and it's really old. You were talking about like things you can do to make yourself more healthy. And, a lot of them were like stretch, drink water. Like, hey, you want to look big? Like stretching makes your muscles more limber. They look bigger. Hydrate yourself. Your muscles will look bigger. If that's what you're after, do this shit. It will. And I noticed now your approach to strength and conditioning, you're doing a lot of yoga. You're doing some really great stuff with functional strength and conditioning. There's a lot of opinions out there on this stuff. What is your take now on that? Because obviously you want to, I can tell that you're trying to protect your body while you're training to make sure you stay healthy. What's your reasoning for kind of really concentrating on those efforts now?
Yeah. So, for me, I when I win or lose in jiu-jitsu, I've never once 20 something years ago, first time with Pat, just oh my God, or these days with Henry, I never ever feel win, lose or draw that it's ever been down to strength. Oh, Pat's so strong, or if I could bench more, I would have beat Henry or something. No, it's always technique. So I'm not trying to get stronger because I think that's the key to jiu-jitsu. I think whenever I'm doing any kind of strength and conditioning, it's injury prevention. Mobility is really huge, expanding or at least maintaining mobility, especially end range mobility, because that's if you're getting armbar or straight or Americana or Kimura, you're talking about end range mobility, right? When the joint or muscles and or tendons kind of fail on you. And so a lot of it's that for me, right? And I think flexibility to me is kind of like strength. I don't feel like I'm getting super flexible. I think I could do all the steroids in the world. I'm not going to look like Arnold, right? He already had different genetics than I had. And I could try to do the splits forever, and I'd probably gain a few inches or so, but I wouldn't look like some gymnast who can go to 195 degrees or something. And so it's not really strength and flexibility, which I think they increase, but I think they increase very slowly and you're kind of genetically limited. For me, I think it's mobility and injury prevention and things like that. And then, just maintenance of whatever muscle mass I have, not trying to become a bodybuilder, but, just maintaining the muscle mass. I think that's a big part of just healthy aging in general, generically, but also the ability to just keep doing jiu-jitsu, which is really what I care about.
Did you, when you were at Hickson's, was Elio around?
No, he first of all, he would go back and forth between Brazil and America. And secondly, after Hickson split, Elio was mainly with Horian at the first academy, and Hickson was kind of out on his own.
So
as a historian, do you, sorry, go ahead, Nate.
I was going to say, if we were to fast forward a little bit, I remember, I think that I always think back of that fight. So just to say, that fight that you have with Nuri was supposed to be with,
Mario from the Dragon's Lair or whatever.
There was a feud between Boston BJJ and the Dragon's Lair. And the fight got thrown up that Mario Ramos, the head of Dragon Slayer, wanted to fight someone. I just remember John goes, I'll do it. Like, just like, you know, hey, want to go play catch? Hey, you want to fight the head of the school review? I'll do it. And then I remember he had heard about that John wasn't just a jiu-jitsu guy, that he had really good striking and really good wrestling. And he pulled out. And of course, you know, Nuri, who takes every fight everywhere, takes the fight and, you know, became a good training partner of ours in the future. But that was a great moment too, you know?
Yeah, no, I think about Nuri from time to time because, you know, there were like 2 days, there was no bad blood leading up to it. And there were like 2 days of bad blood after it. And then, yeah, I was happy to train with him at Team Elite, and he's a cool guy. And it was more, you know, we're just in there competing. We have no control. It was actually, you know, the promoter and the ref that I was angry at, but that gets projected onto the person you fought. But it didn't take me like 2 days to realize, like, oh, wait, no, he's just in my position. Like, he's not looking at the ref and saying, ref, you need to do this, right? Nuri was perfectly willing to let whatever happen. And if the ref says stand up, we stand up, right? So yeah, no, that was good. And like I said, for me, that was jujitsu, right?
Yeah.
It, you know, I wasn't interested in a career like Kenny. I was already married and everything. But that was as natural to me as a gi tournament. Neither of them are like exactly what we're doing in training, right? Training is a little more pure, and those are two kind of specialized versions of, you know, the smaller and more specialized versions of pure jiu-jitsu, which has everything as far as I'm concerned. But then in one, it's like, okay, you can't grab any clothing and you can punch each other. And in another one, it's like you can grab all the clothing, but you can't punch each other. And they're kind of extreme versions of what we're doing every day in jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
So was your interest to kind of expand on that a little bit? And maybe I'm just confirming your point, but so MMA wasn't necessarily like, hey, I want to go fight. Was it more like, I want to test my jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, that's all it was. And also I knew the younger guy at that point. I thought there was a good chance I'd have some kind of school at some point. And I went through a few different evolutions of where I am as a coach. And it's like, I knew younger guys might want to fight, right? And so just to have I needed a little bit of experience just to be credible as a coach.
Right. It's super interesting, like thinking back on that. I see Nuri around, you know, here and there. Chat with him
still fighting
again. What a nice
No, I'm not kidding. I coached the guys down not that long ago, and I look over and Nuri's on the card. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah.
He's like the George Foreman of jiu-jitsu and MMA. Yeah. But more power to him. It means like he's also not worried about like padding his record. He just wants to go out there and get after it. Yeah, it's all good. No, he's a cool guy. I respect it. I don't want to do it, but.
So Nate mentioned to me earlier that he still uses some of the drills that he learned from you at the original day class. Nate, what drills are those?
You remember what we'd start class with when you talk? So I still remember, like, it's funny, John's talking about these conversations to start these classes, and like, there was no day class originally. There was no MMA on Friday originally. And so like when they talked to Roberto and they're like, yeah, we have MMA on Fridays. I'm like, I'm in, like, day one. This is awesome. Thanks. John wanted to start teaching day classes. And so I remember I had my car that didn't have a muffler, and Kenny and I were working in downtown Boston, and we'd leave for lunch and we'd drive down to Harvard and pick up John and go in, and I'd rev my Toyota, some Toyota they don't even make anymore, Prelude, with no muffler, and scare everybody. John would be sunbathing right in Harvard Square, sitting on a bench like this, right? We'd go in, and it was the best. That day class was awesome. And I remember you have this whole sit-through drill that you'd start with us. Like when you're on the bottom, someone sprawled out on you. And I still go through that all the time. Like, I love that as a warm-up drill.
Awesome. Yeah, no, Roberto was, like I said, he had a day job, and so the school was empty, and I'm like, I want to train more, you know. And that might have been the first. I mean, because when I was younger and doing traditional martial arts, I hated training in the morning because I was stiff, and you're always trying to do the splits and kick people in the head and everything. And I thought, like, man, by the afternoon and the evening, I've been walking around all day and I'm all loose and I feel great. And these days, man, I don't want to train at night because I'm tired and I come home adrenalized and then I can't sleep. So like my ideal now is the opposite. Like the earlier I can train, the better. Maybe those day classes were the beginning of that. So I figure, like, man, I got my training in. I can use that adrenaline to fuel me all day rather than to keep me up at night. If someone, work ends and someone says, "Do you want to have a beer?" I could say yes instead of no, I gotta go train. So yeah, no, these days I would say that like 80% of my training is as early as I can make it.
It's funny you mentioned that. So many of us, I know Nate and George, and we're teaching jiu-jitsu classes late at night these days. And
it's hard, man.
Yeah, I get home at like 10 o'clock at night. I eat real quick and I go to sleep. And sometimes I don't sleep well because of it. As I get older, I realize like those changes in my body kind of really affect me over a long period of time. And it's weird, like, the 6 a.m. class on Monday mornings, I hate waking up, but those are probably my best days. Like Monday is like my favorite day because I am energized throughout the day. Like, I trained for an hour and a half or 2 hours, sat in the sauna for a little bit. You know what I mean? As opposed
Sounds
to
ideal.
What the hell happened last night? Like, oh God, like
right.
Falling out of bed. You know what I mean? So your training is more in the morning these days.
Yeah, I mean, I can control it. If someone asks me to come in and teach, that'll be at night sometimes. But if I'm scheduling my own training, like kettlebells, yoga, jujitsu, I'm always trying to do a lot of times it's limited because some places don't have early classes. So like my strength and conditioning guy, the earliest he has is 10 a.m. So like I go in Tuesdays, Thursdays at 10 a.m. But I would be happier if it were earlier. And then yoga is 7 a.m. That's awesome. There's no traffic. Because if I leave my house at say like 6 or 6:15, like there's no traffic. And Seoul is not a huge city, but it's huge in terms of population. Mm-hmm. So like geographically, it's not that spread out, but you have like 12 million people. So you can imagine what rush hour looks like. But if I'm leaving early, it's like the streets are empty. I get there, it's awesome. I'm done at 8 a.m. Yeah. And then jiu-jitsu, most places either have a 11 or a noon class that I can hit. So it's nice. And then I go, same thing, sauna, lunch, have the rest of my day. Also, because my daughter's still at home, I've been able to, have dinner with the family and be at home at night more and stuff, which is good.
That's a big one too. Like if you're able to spend some time with the family, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
All of us kind of can relate to.
If it wasn't like quarantine, how much would you be training right now? Like how many days a week do you normally train now?
It's funny because I've noticed like psychologically it's really important because when you can, like I can train unlimited, right? And so when I choose not to, it's like, I'm going to rest today. So it's like, I'm choosing not to. But when someone forces you not to, it makes you crazy, right? If I'm like, I don't want to train today, that's good. But if someone says you can't train today, like the psychology of it is totally different. So now I feel like I want to train like twice a day, 7 days a week. But that once I can do that again, I'll find my balance. I would say it depends on my family schedule, my work schedule, and everything, because this isn't my day job. So like if there's a lot of busyness at work, that's how I pay my rent and feed my family. So that first. But I would say it would average out on any given week, probably 4 times a week. Yeah. And like if I have a lot of free time, I'll be in 6. And if I'm busy, I'll be in 2. But I would say the average is probably 4 training sessions a week or so. Pure jiu-jitsu.
Can I ask you, and we always say that this podcast is unedited, and if you want to even strike this question, we can strike the question. It will never have occurred at all. but you had an online confrontation at one point with another guy that was teaching jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Mickey.
I love talking about this.
So do you want to tell the Mickey Choi story?
Oh, yeah. It's so easy. So he, chronologically, I go into my own academy, and he's there with a white belt on. And, you know, the instructor who runs the day-to-day operations at the academy, who I've since gotten rid of. I got rid of him at brown belt, didn't give him a black belt, and I'm very happy I did that. And this is just one of the things that, this is not major, but, you know, evidently he had been in there a few times and already acting crazy. And the guy doesn't give me a heads up at all.
And this is like 05?
I forget. Yeah, you could go back and check.
Somewhere
but
like
anyway,
that.
Yeah. So the guy who's running the academy doesn't give me a heads up that this guy's kind of kooky. Just has me roll with him. And he's so bad. It's like he's not a white belt. You know, you can tell he's faking it, but he's not really a good blue belt either. He's like in some weird no man's land. But I'm getting headbutted and elbowed, and not on purpose, right? It's not that he thinks we're doing Vale Tudo, it's that he's a spaz. And so, like, you know, I take his back and he's trying to escape and he headbutts me, and like I'm on his side and he's trying to escape and he elbows me and stuff. And so I just like slow it down. I'm like, dude, you're hitting me. And he's, oh, you know, and it happens a couple more times and I smack him in the head. And I said, you're hitting me, you know? So that, you know, and of course, you know, that's the time I rolled with him. And then he disappears, resurfaces only weeks later with a black belt on, opening his own academy, saying that he's a black belt world champion. So now I'm like kind of interested, but not angry at him or anything, just like, wow, this guy's obviously crazier than I thought. I could tell he was a little bit crazy. And I'm like, whatever, like Jiu-Jitsu is already too big in Korea. You know, there's a lot of schools that trace their lineage back to me, but there's a lot that don't now, right? They don't want to do the hard training. They go for 6 months to Brazil and, you know, get a blue belt and pay some famous guy a bunch of money to come out every year and they get a new belt and whatever. Like, I'm not trying to control Jiu-Jitsu in Korea. And like I said, there's all kinds of routes to getting your belt. And I'm like, okay, so this guy, he's a black belt. It's weird that he came in with a white belt and lied about it, but whatever. But then I get contacted by this Machado affiliate in Utah. I guess he was in Utah, this kid. He's a Korean/Korean American. He's mostly Korean, but he had lived in America. And they're like, oh, I heard something about you and Mickey Che. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, he came to the school with this belt, and then now he's a black belt world champion. And they're like, oh, yeah, you know, he was at our school in Utah, and we begrudgingly gave him a purple belt, which we regretted. But then all of a sudden he showed up to no-gi Worlds and enrolled as a black belt because you're not wearing a belt, right? And this is back before Carlinhos had really locked everything down. So he shows up at no-gi Worlds and signs up for a black belt, and there's no one in his division, and so he gets a gold medal. And so now he's a black belt world champion, even though he's only like a 2-day-old purple belt that was given kind of with regret by probably a not very good school out in bumfuck Utah, right? Right. And so I'm just laughing at this point. I'm just like, this guy's a total clown. And with the internet, there are no secrets, right? I'm like, his business isn't gonna flourish because everyone has the internet, and he's obviously a kook, and you know. But the Machado guys asked me to kind of write a statement for them because they were going after him in U.S. court for something. And then another guy in Korea went after him. And I was just like, yeah, I'll help you guys. But he was kind of off my radar. Then he starts coming on the internet and talking all this shit about how when he trained with me, I did this. And when he trained with me, I did that. And I just said, look, I wasn't going to try to tell you couldn't open a school, but you're mentioning me by name, and what you're saying is false. I said, if you're a black belt world champ, it's like I'm a 40-something-year-old part-time jiu-jitsu guy. You're a young black belt world champion. I'm like, let's just see who has real jiu-jitsu. Let's just have a match. And he's like, okay, something like, should it be a gi or no gi or MMA? And I said, all three. I said, 5 minutes each.
I don't care.
Yeah, I know. I said all three. And I said, but it has to be gi. I said, but I do care about the order. I said, it has to be gi, then no gi, then MMA. Because if we do MMA first, you're done for the day. So you're not, I won't even get the chance to fuck you up with a gi and without a gi. Because I can just put him to sleep with a gi, and then he'll still have to fight me no gi, and I can put him to sleep again. But then in MMA, I can really fuck him up. And then he's like, yes. And then like a week later, disappeared off the face of the earth. So it actually worked out well, because I would have derived an immense amount of personal satisfaction, because I'm even in my 50s, I'm still kind of mean, from in public on film, just beating the shit out of him. But it would have been bad for my reputation, because I'm supposed to be a university professor, and I'm supposed to be a gentleman, and I should have known better, and he's obviously crazy, and all the stuff would have been negative. And so it actually worked out perfectly. Like, anyone with half a brain cell knows why he disappeared, right? And the paper trail is there. So it was like the Bruce Lee thing. I got to fight him without fighting him, and it's the best possible outcome.
Right. It's cool, because for me, that's kind of like a samurai honor thing, and it's something that we're a lot of us are trying to do, is preserve jiu-jitsu, right? Preserve, because there's so many academies now and so many people talking shit, and while the quality of jiu-jitsu is far, far less than what you would be led to believe by looking out there. And you're right, like, nothing to gain, like, you know what I mean? Like, the notoriety was not important to you. You don't care about being famous for jiu-jitsu. You kind of are, just because of the nature of your abilities and your technique and your kind of your approach and your philosophy. But it wasn't like you were seeking notoriety. It wasn't like I want the money for whatever, or, you know what I mean? It was defending the sanctity of jiu-jitsu, kind of, in my opinion. It was like, hey, this guy's horseshit, and I'm calling you out on it.
Yeah, and even then, like I said, I don't feel like I'm the sheriff of jiu-jitsu in Korea, but then it was like I wanted to be, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate. But then he's like on the internet mentioning my academy and me by name and lying, basically. So, there's always a limit.
Right.
Hey, so, I was going to say, if you're going to fast forward a little bit again, just like time-wise through Boston, when you got your black belt, and this is something that came up, I can't remember what the order was. Were you after Pat, or was it Pat, Doug?
No, Pat, then me. It was Pat, then me.
You. So Pat, then Doug, then Kenny, Keith, or did
probably? Yeah, I was June. I remember I was June of 2002, and Pat would have been at least a year or more before that. Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
and Joe never made it to brown belt. I don't think. Maybe he made brown belt. He quit.
He quit. Yeah.
And the original Joe. This is another thing about jiu-jitsu. The original Joe, who had the karate school. And there were a lot. He wasn't the only one. I remember him because he was like the guy who owned the school. He quit pretty soon after we moved downstairs. And I remember there was an original group. I'm sure this happened with Horian and everyone else. There's this original group, and the training isn't quite as difficult, and the training isn't quite as structured. And they have a high position in the hierarchy just by the privilege of having been there first.
Yeah.
But then people start showing up who are thrashing them, and the training gets more focused and harder, and they're losing more than they're winning, and then they quit. There's a lot of people like that, and one of the things I always try to have, like, when I do my yearly seminars, I try to have like a philosophical theme. And a few years ago, whenever someone says, how do you get good at jiu-jitsu? How do you get good at jiu-jitsu? For a long time, I was more like Pat, like, just train and
train more.
Yeah. But which is not wrong, but it doesn't help people who are looking for philosophy either. And I came up with something which goes right back to the old Boston BJJ, and was like, you have to like jiu-jitsu more than you like winning. Right? Because everyone liking winning is easy, right? Everyone likes to win, but it's like you have to like jiu-jitsu more. So I would rather lose attempting the technical jiu-jitsu answer than win by bench pressing or running away or spazzing out or whatever, cheating. And then over time, counterintuitively, that makes you win more because you don't care about it and your jiu-jitsu gets better. And these guys didn't like jiu-jitsu enough, basically, right? They liked the result and they quit. So, yeah, but there were a lot of guys who quit for different reasons. But, yeah, it would have been, I think, I don't know for sure, but I think maybe Doug. Kenny and Keith were probably a little bit after that. I don't know if there was anyone in between. Mike Wenzel had already left for New York. He graduated. So law school's 3 years. So Mike was there 3 years. Mike was a force. I mean,
I remember him. He was really good.
Because he was super smart, super technical, but also had the physical hardware, right? This big guy. And he went up. I think he probably got his brown belt before he left because he was there a full 3 years. But even if he was a purple belt, I heard stories. I mean, he went to Henzo's and was wrecking everyone, which is awesome because he's good, you know. And I met Mike once in Japan. I stayed with him in Japan. He was still training in Japan, but I don't know. I don't hear about him, and I don't know if he's still training. Yeah.
You know a name that I haven't thought of when we think of he didn't end up getting a black belt from Roberto because he went back to his roots. But one of the guys that kind of poked in there for a number of years was Tim Burrow.
Yeah.
Yes. Tim was around for a long time.
Yeah. And I see him a lot. And did you get a chance to train with Tim?
I trained with Tim a lot. And then one of the things I got from Tim, he was with Carlos Machado, and I didn't really recognize it I recognized it at the time, but I didn't recognize how important it was. Tim's passing at the time is more like the way I pass now under the influence of Henry. It was a pressure style passing, and I didn't recognize because Tim was kind of big. I mean, and I could almost think it was like a style that was good for his body, but maybe not good for me. And I felt at that time I had to be more mobile because I was smaller, but it's not true. I mean, what he was doing, I think Carlos probably taught even the lightweights. It was more like you change angles, but you don't retreat. You're always you have this forward pressure and you're using gravity and body weight. And Tim would use gravity and body weight. And the fact that he was technical and big made it particularly effective for him, but I think it's effective for everybody. And I noticed really early, we were at Boston, I think a lot of us would come in, if we get blocked, we'd kind of back out and toreando or, back out and leg drag. And he was it's like, I'll change my angle, but I won't back out, right? I'll just keep shifting and moving forward. And that's what I remember about his style being super effective. And then something that I do more of now.
It's funny you mentioned it, and you alluded to it just a minute ago when you were talking about the difference between winning and kind of learning in jiu-jitsu. I like going back to competition just for a second because there's a lot of competitors out there. A lot of people that listen to the podcast are competitors. I know that when I'm training for a competition, the focus is winning, right? Like I use 10% of my jiu-jitsu, right? Like the best 10%, like my go-to options. Is that a retardation of your evolution of jiu-jitsu? Because if you're a constant competitor and you're like, I want to compete white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt, are you limiting the potential evolution of kind of in the completeness?
I mean, it's a great question. I guess my answer isn't if someone competes every weekend, they couldn't do what I recommend. But what I recommend to my guys who fight is exactly what you're saying. Like in a jiu-jitsu tournament, your job is to kind of unilaterally force your A game down your partner's throat or your opponent's throat. Like give them nothing, take everything. Don't do anything you're not comfortable with, right? But then if you go back to the academy and you train that way, like here's your A game, right? Your A game's this big. That's what you do in a tournament. But if you do that in the academy, it just stays here. It gets a little bit stronger. But if you go back to the academy and you train your B game and your C game and don't work your A game, what happens is when you go to fight your next tournament, not every week, but let's say it's a few months, then the A game that you have to unilaterally force down someone's throat is this big, right? It's kind of gone out towards your B game. And then you go back to the academy and the new stuff you're practicing is this big. And then the next tournament, your A game is this big. So your strategy is always the same, which is take your A game and ram it down someone's throat and give them nothing. But in the gym, your training in jiu-jitsu is to work on your B game and C game and fold them into your A game so that you have more and more things to smash people with. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. Yeah. And
so I work on all my weaknesses in the gym and then try to do only what I'm good at in a fight.
Imagine, like, I feel like this is like, you know, a father talking to his son, you know what I mean? Like when you're 15, you won't listen to anything anybody's telling you. Right. You're talking about, I'm winning every tournament I compete in. And it's like, nobody cares who the white belt world champion is. Like, nobody cares. Like, be like, you know, develop your jiu-jitsu. And it's very hard to tell young people to do that, to set their ego aside. And we all, it's like, it's the biggest cliche in jiu-jitsu, right? Like, check your ego at the door. But not a lot of people really do it. And it's hard to do. And as like we've trained more, it becomes a little bit easier. You're like, you start the techniques you decide to use, like your tool set, your finish is like, well, I can now do this. You know what I mean? Which is something that Rickson like prides himself on, that X choke, because you can get anybody with it, right? Like, I don't care who you are, I'll get you with it. You know what I mean? Not this really crazy, you know, game that like leads to all of the basic positions in reality. But it's so hard to teach young people to drill that completeness. Something like maybe I didn't have, because surviving with you animals on the mat was not an easy thing to do. I came up getting the shit kicked out of me by you and Nate and Kenny and Keith and Pat and Pags. You know what I mean? It was about survival, but that it's fun. It's a fundamental of teaching, and it goes beyond what you teach as far as techniques that day. It's like, here's your philosophy for learning. And I think yours is a little bit more directed and a little bit more polished than a lot of schools are teaching.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, it's taken a while, but I feel like it is now. But the other, and that doesn't mean everyone listens to me. Like you said, they don't want to hear it. But the other thing is that I think, like, when someone says I'm a white belt world champion or blue belt world champion, I think that can be the worst thing for your jiu-jitsu, because the kinds of things you can do to win at white and blue belt, you can win at white and blue belt with speed and strength and aggressiveness and power, instead of good technique. At purple belt, that'll start to even out, and at brown belt, and especially like by the time you get to brown and black belt, it's like, look, everyone is on steroids. Everyone is young and strong and aggressive and has cardio for days and strength for days. And so it's only going to be your technique that's going to set you apart. And so I think, you know, I used to think jiu-jitsu was awesome because you could it's not like boxing. I mean, you can spar on day one and not get hurt and everything. But these days, again, back to Rorion, I think he had a lot of really good ideas. And like, if I were running a commercial school, I would run some version of a foundations or on-ramp or Gracie combatives program, and not have people sparring until they actually, you know, knew kind of what they were doing in each position. And then when they did spar, I'd do a lot more position sparring than free sparring, because, you know, you get in a bad position and you bench press someone off you, and, you know, you pretend it never happened, and that works at white and a little bit at blue belt, but later that's like you're just getting arm barred all the time, or you're getting injured. I think it just builds a lot of really bad habits, that emphasis on results versus technique from early on in jiu-jitsu.
You know, I think it's kind of your question, Jay, though. I think it's the beauty of jiu-jitsu is that it's self-correcting. If you just focus right here, you're going to get exposed over here or over here, and your circle has to widen. If you're training with good people, they will expose you. And because I think I've run into this a lot. Should I focus on one thing for the next 3 months, or should I do everything for the next 3 months? And just, you know, and I don't think there's a right answer. There's a time for both. But you know, when someone's beating you with something that you're like, what did they just do to me? Or I know what that is. Why couldn't I stop it? You're going to go work on that area and get better in that spot. So if you go compete and you dominate everyone, great. But as you go up the ranks, like, yeah, as John said, white, blue belt, world champ, you're going to get to brown belt, and people are going to be doing things that you have to have addressed those problem areas, or you're going to run into the problem no matter what.
And the essence of the topic, bringing it up, is because I don't even think it was formally a question. It's kind of like, here, like, what do you think about this? But you see a lot of people get to blue belt and purple belt level, and that ego gets in the way, and those are people that end up quitting because they're not winning. They're gonna win. And that ideology, that philosophy of training is, if we can figure it out how to drive people towards it early, they're not going to be concerned with that. About, like, there's a number of guys at Port City that are like big, strong, powerlifting athletes. Like, yeah, you're not going to beat on that guy. You guys started on the same day and you're 125 pounds, but you can't quit. Like, you can't measure yourself against the progress of someone else. You measure yourself against the progress of yourself. And that, Nate, I've seen it a million times. Like, you know what I mean? You get the right people together. You like, oh, like, I want to bring Jimmy in and Josh, and like, yeah, you're not going to win all the time with a group like that. Those are really, really tough people. But what you get from that is the greatest benefit of jiu-jitsu, regardless of winning or not. And I'm trying to think of, John, and Nate, your perspective on like how you get people to really let go of that, because, man, it's that's the hardest part to teach.
So 2 answers. One, like I said, even my own guys, I can only tell them what I think they should do, but some of them don't listen. And if they're not, if they're only hurting themselves and they're not hurting other people, I don't kick them out of my association or my school. I just keep telling them, like, man, you gotta be careful about that. But I think as a coach or as an instructor or as a school owner, like, the way you design the class and the way you design the training, both the way you frame it, like when you explain jiu-jitsu, but also just the actual class, can be really important. So one of the things that Rickson always did, and, Henry continues and SBG does, is like, they do a lot more positional sparring than they do free sparring. So that takes a lot of the ego out of it. So in other words, if you and I just start on our feet and it's like, nothing matters except who taps, that's a free for all, right? Versus, okay, Jay, you mount John for 2 minutes, and if you tap him, you just start over. And if he puts you in half guard or full guard, or upas you off, you start over. So like, my ego's not already out of it, because like, oh yeah, coach told Jay to mount me. This is a horrible position. Maybe it's just good if I can survive, and then
I still want my 4 points.
you can have 8, but you know what I mean, like, takes the ego out of it. On the beginning of it takes the ego out. Like, well, I'm giving up one of the worst positions in jiu-jitsu. Let's see if I can just protect my neck and maybe get to half guard. Versus, man, Jay swept me, then he passed my guard, then he mounted me, now I'm tired, now my ego's all messed up. You know what I mean? It's a different headspace that you're in when you're training. And also, whether you succeed or fail, you get immediately put back in that situation to correct your error. So it's like, oh yeah, I was like pushing on Jay's chest and he straight arm locked me. That's not going to happen again, right? You go back and I'm like, oh, I can't push on, like Nate says, jiu-jitsu is self-correcting. So my game will be sharpened. Whereas in free sparring, it's like, you sweep me, and now like I don't even have half a second to think about why my base was off. It's like, man, I don't want you to pass my guard. And then you pass my guard, and I don't even have a half a second to address the weaknesses in my guard. It's like, oh, he's in side control. I got to keep him from, Americanaing me or mounting me. And, and then you mount me, and I don't realize why my mount defenses are weak. I'm like, man, he's about to collar choke me. And there's no time to really, and it's not a big deal as you go up. You don't need that time. And thinking about jiu-jitsu it's important not to think about it. But if you're a white belt or a blue belt, it's super important, I think, to like, go back to mount. Quit pushing on his chest. So then you get collar choked, and you're like, oh, so now I have to find a happy medium where I'm not extending, but I'm able to defend my neck. And, you tap maybe 5 times in 5 minutes, but you correct all these mistakes and your ego's not involved. So I think the way classes are set up can minimize that ego involvement too.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? There's a pretty intimate relationship between positional rolling and drilling, right? Like, it's like, you might do a warm-up, and then you teach a couple techniques, and then you do drilling, and then positional rolling, and then rolling. You know what I mean? Like, how do you – this might be a really boring,
No.
You're listening, but like your orchestration of the class,
yeah, I think it's partially semantics. Like when some people say drilling, they mean positional rolling. When other people say drilling, it's like Andre Galvao doing 100 leg drags, which I think is bullshit and worthless. That judo style, like I'm gonna do 100 entries and then one throw, and I'm gonna do 100 leg drags and then one pass. I mean, some people may learn that way. For me, I think there's no resistance, there's no timing. The rep quality deteriorates after about 5 reps. My mind goes numb. I just don't want to do it. So, but other people call drilling like, okay, we're not free sparring and our environment is limited, and like, okay, like Jay, you're in side control and John, you're on the bottom, and you can't go knee on belly and you can't mount. You can only try to finish with a choke and armbar from side control. And John, you can't pull guard and you can't run away. You really just have to stay in side control and defend. I mean, this is blurring the line between drilling and positional sparring. So it's kind of, every coach has a different word for it. I only care about going from zero resistance technique to resistance technique, but with a limited environment, right? And you call it drilling or positional sparring. I just think it's boring. I don't like to do it, but I think it's the most beneficial when I do it. And it's certainly the most beneficial for students in the first few years.
That's cool. I mean, it seems elementary, right? Like, but what schools have traditionally done is you go from 1 to 4. You know what I mean?
Technique and then free sparring.
Right. And I think the approach you're talking about, and I've seen it, like, you know what I mean? I spend a lot of time at Mass BJJ, and this is the way that Nate teaches too, is kind of progressing through these stages.
Yeah.
And this thing really becomes a philosophy. It used to be how, like just train and spend time on the mat and you'll get better. And now it's how do you progress a student even faster than we were able to do because of.
And Pat's a gifted athlete and he's a lifelong martial artist. And some people in every school are going to do really well with that. It's like, show me some techniques and let me roll. So like what you'll get is like the top 25% will be awesome. They're natural athletes. They'll never give up. They think about jujitsu in the off hours, but 75% of people will be lost. It's like, you just showed me a kind of involved sweep from half guard, but I suck at half guard. And now I'm about to spar with this guy who's bigger and stronger than me. So I'm never going to go to half guard. So that class is just lost. It just kind of evaporates into thin air because the 30 minutes of sparring, I avoid half guard like the plague and just forget what I was taught, I just think it's a really unideal way.
Going off that though, it's like, Jay, is what because I know I do a lot of positional wrestling, and just like John said, like if I teach something in class, I want people to feel it 15, 20 times rather than maybe one time in a roll. And there's so many times where I can see the guys looking at the clock, like, and they're like, hey, there's 15 minutes left. Are we going to wrestle? I'm like, you are wrestling. Like you're wrestling right now. But I know they want that. And so like, I'll probably give them 3 5-minute rounds or 1 10-minute, whatever it would be at the end. Like they want that free roll, even though it might not be the best. And it's funny because
Me too.
I know right. We all do. No one wants to be on the bottom of side control the whole time doing that, but it's where you're getting good. Right. But in a class where you have a lot of people that come in, and I always remember like, John, you, Patrick, and myself and Roberto used to go up to the gym and lift up above. And then we'd come back down to Roberto's and do class. And he'd always have us run in a circle, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 jumping jacks. And I'm like, why do I have to do push-ups? Like I just lifted up there. And he's like, because everybody else needs to do the push-ups. I'm like, who cares? Why do we do this? And he's like, because Nate, some people only come in here twice a week and this is all they do. This is good for them. And if you don't do it, they're not going to. And I look back, I'm like such an idiot. But
no, I had the same thing. Yeah.
Right. But you have to do a class for a lot of people. They want that free roll, right? But you're right. Like Jay, when you come down, we'll either set matches up or it's okay, Jimmy, you're on top of Jay. every time you pass, go back. If you sweep them, Jay, go back. Right? We'll set certain things up. Or like, what do you think is going to happen in this? And look at all the MMA fighters. Look at like Faraz back in the day and the guys at GSP and those guys up there. They were the ones that I remember that they weren't just beating the crap out of each other and doing full rounds, beating the shit out of each other. They were like, okay, get him on the cage, take him down. He's down, get on the cage, do it again. He gets out, put him back in the cage, do it again, right? You pick your points and you rep stuff out so you get better at those moments. And I think that, as you said, what do you do with the high level guys to get them better? That is what you do with them. But in a regular class, for the people that come there twice a week, they have to wrestle a little bit.
Oh,
right?
It can be too boring. Yeah, for sure. And you're not training pro fighters, and it's a customer service thing, and you want them to leave having had fun and everything. But yeah, I still juggle with it, and I still always end with a few rounds of free sparring because everyone wants to do that, including me.
I remember Hickson. I was at Rodrigo Vaghi's when Hickson was there, and this is in the early 90s, and someone asked how much they should be drilling and how much they should be sparring, and he said, it depends where you are. And he said, like, a white belt should be drilling all the time because you're not going to get much out of sparring. And he goes, and a black belt, they can go to whatever position they want most of the time when they're wrestling. So they could wrestle all the time and get whatever drilling they need out of it. And he goes, but a white belt probably doesn't want to just drill all the time. So you got to let them wrestle and have fun, right? You got to have fun with the work. But that was his philosophy on it.
I think it's spot on. I'm wondering if they didn't get, it's just a guess, but Ben Askren made a post last year about this. And I think wrestlers do this all the time. Yeah. And I'm wondering because it doesn't seem too much like judo based. And I'm wondering if this isn't another thing that Holes got from Bob Anderson and other wrestlers and introduced into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and that Hickson got it from Holes. It wouldn't surprise me. So I don't think it comes organically out of judo. I haven't seen this really as a part of a judo class that I've ever been in. They seem to be more like that. What they call drilling is like 100 entries and one throw, and then they go to randori. They spar.
Yeah.
And I think that's more like Gracie Baja is more like that. Alliance is more like that. So I don't know. Most jiu-jitsu schools, at least until the last few years, maybe they've gotten smarter, but most jiu-jitsu schools, it was 3 maybe related, maybe random techniques, spar, repeat.
Yeah. And it's funny, like you said, I think we thrived in that environment, but there were a lot of people that left. There were a lot of people in those days that left. And I think when in the same way you were talking, because I was thinking of moving out to train with and live with Hickson, because I had been going out when he was in St. Louis and training with him, and I decided to come home, met Roberto. It's so funny because I met the guy in Waltham as well,
Maffey,
Joe Maffey, because he was under Hickson. I was like, oh, a Hickson blue belt or some black belt I've never heard of, and immediately when I met Roberto, I'm like, this is the guy that I want to train with, and I really didn't like Maffey. Came off a little kind of crazy to me. But I really feel like we had such a high level of talented people that were obsessed with jiu-jitsu that I'm really glad I look back. Like you said, if I had moved to LA, I probably would have been happy and not looked back, but where I am here, I'm super happy. Like, I think this was the only place to train. So everybody came and everybody was obsessed. And Roberto had the technical knowledge to give us good jiu-jitsu, but he also had a long leash on us and let us just kind of beat the crap out of each other and go do some Vale Tudo, which turned into MMA, which turned into, we have people that are high-level jiu-jitsu competitors have come out there, to UFC people, and great coaches that have come out of there. And like, I look at all of us that are still involved with jiu-jitsu 30, 20 something years later. Like, it's kind of crazy. I don't know. I looked at like how many of my students 20 years from now will all still be training, because there's a lot of us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We were all crazy for it. And we've all stuck with it for a long time.
I And that's, I think of that, and like a lot of the questions that I've asked kind of lead back to this point. You know what I mean? You think about from a business perspective or a development perspective, you got to give students a little bit of what they need and a little bit of what they want, right? But it's very difficult to defeat your mind and your heart because of the way we came up, right? And you desire to kind of put yourself back in those positions. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of recreate those training scenarios that I came up with because, you know, my heart swells when that happens. You know what I mean? Like I really desire that. And I care so much about the people that I came up training with, and they were my foundation and they're my world. It's part of the reason we're on this podcast today. These people on the podcast are like really important to me, and it can be self-defeating because there are better ways out there now.
Yeah. Well, I have one for you. It just came to mind as you were talking, Jay, but Romulo Barral came to Korea and did a couple seminars. And, you know, I watched him compete, and, you know, he's like this big hulking, I mean, he's thin, but he's just looks like a bodybuilder, and he's obviously like a pro athlete and everything. So I was like, people have seminars. I can usually go for free in Korea, you know. And so I went, but I wasn't expecting much. And he was a really nice guy and a really good teacher. And so we were talking afterwards, you're having dinner, and I was talking to him, and I'm like, man, you know, it's like, I really like the way you teach. And it's like, I was expecting you to be more of an athlete. Because other, I won't even name any names, but other famous people come through, and it's like, okay, I know how many gold medals you have, but you're a horrible teacher. You know, I have nothing to learn from. Even for free, I just don't go to their seminars anymore. And so like and he was super cool, and we were talking, and he's like, my competition team is voluntary, right? Like no one has to do it. If they come in, it's like going to be the hardest training of their life, and there's no quitting. And like he just trains super hard with them. And Romulo drives like down to Orange County from where he's from. It's like an hour and a half each way to do wrestling with the Doughboys or someone. You know, he's just like obsessed with his training. It shows, right? But he's like, but I also have a really good commercial school. And he's like, if my competition team guys want to come to the normal classes, they know that they're just helping me teach. They know they don't get to thrash anyone. They know that the training's gonna be calmer. If they do anything like that, I'm kicking them out of my school. You know, so like that 2-tier system, I think, is the way to go. You know, because not only there will be the 10% or 20% of guys who want that training and will thrive with that training, but you just can't make a school like what Roberto was saying. Some of these guys only train 2 days a week, Nate. You know, they don't do anything else. You can't make those guys train like they're going to the Olympics. You know, they'll just quit. So Romulo thought it was just like totally normal. He's like, yeah, you have a competition team, and you know, no one's forced to do it. So anyone who's there, you can do whatever you want to them because they're volunteering for it. And then you have your school, and that's about learning, you know, real technical, smooth, refined jiu-jitsu, and take off the intensity, take away the chance of injury. And some people you'll get, and this is the great thing about jiu-jitsu, unlike, you know, like in America, like I want to play football or I want to wrestle or whatever. If you're not ready on day one, you get cut and you never get to learn to play football. You never get to learn to wrestle because you're not already big enough and strong enough. Jiu-jitsu, you can be just the worst, like most deconditioned, uncoordinated person. But man, if you don't quit, some of those guys in 5 years, you're like, I don't recognize you anymore. You're like a little nerd killer now, you know? And so like Romulo doesn't even know if the guys who would quit in the first 3 years, in the fourth year, they might be on the competition team wrecking people, you know? So I think it's a good system to have.
It's like how it says, it's not who's best, it's who's left.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the other thing that does is it gives the people that need jiu-jitsu the most the opportunity to learn jiu-jitsu, you know?
Absolutely.
And I don't think I really got that until I got older and was teaching for a long time. And I'd see, you know, the guy that comes in twice a week or the woman that comes in twice a week and just shows up, and they just come in, and you don't see anything exceptional out of them with their jiu-jitsu. But then one day they come up and they talk about my parent died, and just being here like, you have no idea, this is the thing that got me through that, or whatever, you know, like, and you realize that they don't have to be the best person in the world at jiu-jitsu for the art to mean so much to them, you know? And I think a lot about that I want those people to continue. You know what I mean? The people that are the great athletes, they're going to do it no matter what. Your job is to kind of whip them harder, right? Make them work harder. But the other
sometimes even keep them from overtraining.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll go too hard.
Yeah. But yeah, how do you get those people that jiu-jitsu will transform their life, but they just need that hand to get started, you know? And I think about that a lot when people walk in.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, and if the bar is too high, they never start. Hickson, so I reconnected with Hickson after 20-some years, and we hung out at a cafe down by the beach and just talked for 2 hours. And he said, he gave a story exactly like what you're saying, Nate. And he admitted that, like, most of his jiu-jitsu life was just about performance and beating people. And he's like, these days his jiu-jitsu has a different focus. He said exactly what you said. The analogy he used, he's like, I want to teach jiu-jitsu to a woman, and not because he's like, when people think about women's self-defense or they make videos, like, oh, now this woman like broke this rapist's arm or whatever. He's like, look, that's cool, but it's not really what happens to most people in their lives. The one he used, which was so cool, he's like, I want to teach a woman jiu-jitsu. She goes into a cafe like the one we're at right now. She's a really mild, kind of not very confident person in her life. And she puts her things on a table. She goes to order coffee. She comes back and there's some dude sitting in her seat. And he's like, for her whole life, she would have apologized and like grabbed her keys and like walked off to a shitty table that she didn't want to sit at. And he's like, after jiu-jitsu, she'd be like, not rude, not choke him or anything. It's like, excuse me, sir. I was sitting here. Would you mind going somewhere else? That was his like success story for jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, yeah, totally. That's awesome.
I think that like jiu-jitsu should give us the confidence to be the person we want to be. That's like my goal with the kids growing up. It's, again, not that they're going to beat up the bully on the playground, but that they'll have the confidence in themselves to be true to what they want to do, instead of those peer pressure moments. Like you said, I'll just take my keys and go, or I'll just do what the group's doing and act like the ass of the group because I just want to, right? And George is my number one focus in jiu-jitsu right now.
George,
that's awesome.
Is phenomenal at kind of pinpointing those people when they come in. You know what I mean? The people that won't look you in the eye, that look at the ground while they're walking. Yeah. And 2 years of jiu-jitsu and their head is held high, and they talk to you and they introduce you to their parents, and this is my mom, this is my dad, and they're showing up at tournaments. And George, like, he'll call me after class and be like, hey, did you see that new guy? I'm going to make that guy awesome. He is going to be a killer in a couple years. And it's like a 130-pound kid who just won't engage, and he's the least physical person you'll ever meet. And they need, like, to your point, like, remember Doug Klenda, but I'm thinking of Rick Hawk. Remember Rick Hawk back in the day? Like, he was strong.
Rich O'Connor. Remember Rich? Big guy, hands, tough guy.
Yeah.
And he's someone like that's going to be good at jiu-jitsu anyway, and they don't need such as big of a boost in some of the things we learned from jiu-jitsu as someone like 125 pounds. And George he's like that kid who just got slaughtered. You know what I mean? In the fundamentals class by like a bunch of female blue belts that are killers. You know what I mean? Like that kid. I am going to make that kid awesome. That kid is going to, his life is going to be revolutionized by this. And maybe like, we talk a lot about technique and how to make people better at jiu-jitsu and all that stuff. What you guys are talking about now is how you develop someone's life through jiu-jitsu. Like you make that kid hold his head up high. Like, I don't care if he ever wins a tournament. I don't ever care if he taps anybody. I mean, he pulls his head out and like, pushes his shoulders back and he has pride in himself, like, or herself. What else is there?
Yeah, no, there's a couple of guys that I'm thinking of in Korea at one of the two main schools that I teach at. one guy admitted it took him like a year of doing jiu-jitsu to even admit it. But even now he's super timid, but like he just got his brown belt. He is there every day. But he admitted to me and to the head instructor, he's like, I walked by this school for 2 years trying to get the nerve up to walk in. It was like on his way to work. And if he had walked in and we had been like, okay, put on some boxing gloves and try to take me down or whatever and punch him and choke him out, he's gone. 1 day of jiu-jitsu, never train again. He's been training consistently for like 8 years, awesome brown belt, best partner for like new people or women who are a little bit timid, you know, just the awesomest dude in the whole gym. But it took him 2 years just to walk in the door. And so like, you don't know how hard it was for people to even come talk to you, let alone put on the gi and have someone try to choke him or armbar him. And so, yeah, I think the art or the key is like, how do you let all those people train without ever watering down jiu-jitsu? And I think it's doable. I think it's totally doable.
Yep. And it can be, you know, you flip the script a little bit. It can be equally as hard. You get someone that's physically gifted, but you don't know what they've been through.
Right.
You know, when they come in, they come to the door with a lot of baggage and a lot of stuff. And sometimes they're the most difficult people to kind of handle, but you know they need to be there. And you're
right.
going to teach them a lot of stuff on how to behave, but like, I know you need to be here.
Yeah.
Man, it's like there's a pretty emotional discussion about like how you go about sharing something that you've spent so much time with, and you try to strategize and philosophize the way that you're going to actually kind of put it out there. And because it changed all of our lives, you know what I mean? And it's such an important factor, and everybody gets something a little bit different. You know what I mean? You don't know what everyone's dealing with when they come in on the mat, and you realize what they need. And it's like, I think about that. I'm like, how do you structure a curriculum to address all this stuff? It's overwhelming, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Gracie Academy and SBG have done the best job that I've seen. I don't have the time or energy or inclination to look at every single jiu-jitsu program out there, but I think those two like have a really gradual and really commonsensical kind of on-ramp, like super low bar for entry, but super high standards, and just like giving people only what they can handle, but progressively increasing the resistance and difficulty in a really logical kind of way. Yeah. I think it's important. Rather than just, I mean, the way we learned is like, okay, you know, here's a couple chokes, and the next day it's like, here's a guard pass, the next day here's a foot lock, and the next day, you know, it's like stay for 10 years and train all the time, and you probably get good, but it's not the best way to do it, right?
How did you kind of cross paths with Matt Thornton?
Steve Whittier brought him to Boston for a seminar. So I was a brown belt. It's probably just months before I got my black belt. I think it was probably 2002. And Steve Whittier was running his own school. And Matt, I had seen, I mean, the internet wasn't as developed, so I was still reading like Black Belt Magazine and Inside Kung Fu and stuff. And Matt was writing a lot. And we had pretty similar backgrounds of having done some Jeet Kune Do and been disillusioned with it and sort of landed on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he was writing a lot of highly critical articles about, you know, the way a lot of people were training and highly, you know, praising articles about jiu-jitsu. And so I was like, yeah, that's basically how my development went. So I kind of liked everything he was doing. And then Steve Whittier wanted to bring him in for a seminar. And back then, I don't know how it is now, but it's like, it would be whatever the cost was for Saturday and Sunday, and Matt would do a private on Friday with the host and one other person. And Whittier's like, hey, do you want to do the private with Matt? And I'm like, yeah. And we actually did it at Roberto's downstairs. We all met there. And we just talked and rolled and did this and that, and we all got along really well. And then the seminar wasn't at Roberto's. He got at some other venue. He rented some place. I forget. But we did the seminar, and I told Matt, hey, I'm graduating in a couple months, and I'm moving back to California. And he's like, where in California? I said, Chico. He said, my dad's in Chico. And so, you know, so I moved and I had an academy for a year in Chico, and he came down, and then I went up to camps in Portland, and, you know, just kind of pretty organically we got along. And, you know, if Roberto had some kind of organization at the time, I probably would have done that, but Roberto really didn't. It was just kind of like, here's your black belt. So yeah, just worked out that way. And I faded in and out of SBG when I was kind of moving back to Korea and busy. But then from about 10 years ago or so, they got more, and they weren't that organized. They got more organized. I got more into it and closer with some of those guys. But, you know, every time I'm back, I still make it a point to see Roberto. I have a standing invitation. I haven't had a seminar in Korea that I've hosted yet. All these famous guys come through, and I can go for free, but I've never hosted anyone. And Roberto has a standing invitation to be the first guy, and he's like, yeah, man, that's good. But then how about this May? Well, maybe next fall. And okay, Roberto, how about this fall? Well, maybe next spring. So he hasn't taken the invitation, but he knows, like, he has the first invitation before anyone from SBG or Henry or anyone. So, like, you know, there's no question that, you know, he's my main coach for purple, brown, black belt, you know, except for blue belt. So it's, you know, it's so interesting because, you know, Roberto was like such a really important part of a lot of difficult times for a lot of people, and like such a great part of all the good times too. He's so difficult to pull in the limelight, right? Like, he doesn't want credit for anything. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, hey, come do this. He doesn't want to make a big deal out of anything. And I'm like, hey man, like what you've done is like really important. It's really like, he doesn't even care about, like, you know, the stripes on his own belt, or, like, you know what I mean? Or the notoriety of having someone mention his name when they do something important in jiu-jitsu, even though he was the foundational element for those people. He could care less about any of that stuff. He, like, just cares about his people. It's like, hey, if you have a black belt and you want to open an academy, like, let me know what I can do to help. I'll help you install mats. You know what I mean? And outside of jiu-jitsu, I feel like he's like kind of an inspiration of how I continually want to behave in this thing.
Yeah. Super, super good guy.
Yeah. I hope he does. He takes you up on the offer, though. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a standing offer, so. And then I don't bother him about it, but I'll just remind him once a year. You know, I don't want to pester him. But, like, I should be in Boston at some point. I mean, who knows with all this COVID-19 stuff, but my daughter's one way or the other. She's going to school on the East Coast. She's trying to decide between a couple schools.
Harvard.
But no, rejected. But she did really well. She got
What's close to here?
She got into Dartmouth and she got into UPenn. Got waitlisted at Columbia and Berkeley. But she's not interested in living in New York or Berkeley, and I don't particularly want her to be in New York or Berkeley either. So it's gonna be UPenn, which is better for her. She wants to be an art major, and they have a ton of classes and better jiu-jitsu. Or Dartmouth, which is just, you know, cool liberal arts college. But either way, you know, we're gonna, assuming she doesn't take a year off because of COVID, we'll be getting her moved in whenever, August, September, and I'll definitely just come right to Boston after that.
You gonna make me a wallet?
I mean, I can. Talk about price offline.
Postage, come on, man, that's crazy. I don't know how long.
No, I see all the stuff you make. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, so you've been training with Henry Akins a bunch. What draws you to him?
His jiu-jitsu, I think, is the most technically sound and technically coherent jiu-jitsu that I've ever felt. Like, there's like a philosophy to what he does that's always applied, and it's just, you really have to feel it, because it's like Pat, like, to watch it, it's like, oh, like, I know that, you know. And people say about Hickson too, right? Watching Hickson, well, I mean, in his prime, he was such a specimen. But if you watched him in a gi, you couldn't see what he actually, like, what his body looked like, and you would just be like, oh, he's moving so slow. I would pull my arm out, or I would do this, or I would do that. But then you actually roll with him, and it's like you're paralyzed, like, so, you know. So yeah, Henry, I've never felt better pressure ever in my life, like top pressure. And he's heavier than me, but he's not. I've rolled with guys who are 280 pounds. He weighs like 205 or something. Best top pressure, most efficient, like least amount of wasted movement. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's pretty simple. It's nothing big, right? Just, and also his doing his jiu-jitsu, and so that's his jiu-jitsu. But when I do his jiu-jitsu, I literally feel like I'm doing half as much and getting twice the results. So that's really, if it was just him, like, oh, I'm not hero worshiping, like, oh, I like Rafa Mendez's Berimbolo. I'm not going to do that, right? So it doesn't make any sense for me to train with Rafa, even though I like watching him. I can do everything Henry does, and when I do it, it translates immediately into like extremely obvious, measurable upticks in my jiu-jitsu performance.
That's pretty incredible. I think that throws a wrench in the spokes of watching too much tape on the people that you might compete against or fight against, because you see the techniques they do and you can kind of say, okay, well, that's their game plan, but you don't really know until, like, Kenny's a great example of that. Like, you might know he's going to dig into your collar and he's going to put pressure on you, but until you feel it, you're like, I don't know what's going to be like that. Like, I figured, oh, I can escape this, or I could sweep the person like this. But until you feel their jiu-jitsu, and I think with folks like you talk about Henry or Hickson, like, everything is about what you don't see. It's about how it feels when they're doing it. And I think that's true mastery right there. Like, would an awesome Berimbolo be cool? Yeah, great. But they, like someone like Hickson or Henry, like, they don't need that. They like that. Yeah. That's a piece that they don't see where this fits what I do, because I'm not going to end up in a position where I need to do that, because fundamentally I would have made mistakes long ago if I needed that.
Right. But yeah, it's hard to explain beyond that. You know, just I wouldn't have this much to do with him. I mean, we'd be friends and we'd be cordial and everything, but I wouldn't seek out every opportunity to train with him unless, like, every time I mean, and it's good because, like, when I met him, my jiu-jitsu was already whatever it was good enough, you know, and I had enough. And then working with him, I see these big jumps that I hadn't seen since like purple belt or something. Because the jumps get really, really small. With brown and black belt, like, you're happy to move this much, right? And then now I've been I got my black belt 18 years ago. No, does that make sense? Yeah, geez, I got my black belt 18 years ago. So, you know, to be making really, really big jumps, and then also I like it for teaching too. I mean, it gives me material to teach because I think his material is super solid and it is very non-attribute based. You don't have to be super fast or flexible or strong to do any of the things he shows, and that really attracts me as well.
What's your goals, man? Your jiu-jitsu goals now?
Stay healthy. You know, I train as much as possible. It's so simple, right? Like, I don't care about making world champions. I don't care about, you know, I'm available for everyone who wants to learn from me. But, like, a lot of my guys are like, you know, they're skipping warm-ups and even skipping techniques to watch, you know, the latest leg lock video and then come in to class and just try to do that, or, you know what I mean? And it bothers me a little bit until, like, I was complaining to Henry about it, and he's like, oh yeah, just like my guys. And I'm like, wait, but, you know, you're like Hickson's, you know, fastest black belt, and people, you know, ship you all over the world and pay you all this money, and, you know, and he's like, oh yeah, but at my school, he's like, yeah, they're trying to do all this. They're watching videos and skipping my warm-ups too. And I'm like, okay, I feel bad for you, but I feel better for myself. Like, you can't, there's just a lot of dumb people out there. You can't force them to train the right way. So now I'm, like, trying to just, like, get rid of that attachment to, why don't you train exactly like me? It's like, look, you know, like, I teach team training Friday mornings and Saturday afternoons. Like, whatever I do during the week is depending on how busy I am. But if I'm in Korea, if my body is in Korea, I'm basically teaching our team training, which is, you know, open to all the different academies, and all the instructors should come to, you know, update their jiu-jitsu. And some come and some don't. And it used to bother me. And now it's just like, man, they know where I am. They know what I'm offering, and I'm going to be doing that for my whole life until I'm physically not capable of doing it. And then also, you know, constantly trying to improve my own jiu-jitsu and other things. And that's it. Like there's only that macro goal, right? There's no micro goal. I want to make this guy a world champion, or I want myself to be able to do something. Like in my physical training, I'm not trying to get my bench press numbers up, or in yoga, I'm not trying to do the splits. It's like being there is enough for me as a student and as a teacher. Like everything good comes from being there with the right intention. And then that's all I can control. And so that's a beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu. It takes a long time to start applying it to your life, but it's exactly the same. Like if some 250 pound guy is on top of me in side control, it doesn't matter if I say, well, he's a purple belt and I'm a black belt. It's like, I can't really move him. I can only move myself. Right. And it's the same thing emotionally and, you know, psychologically. It's like, look, I can't make anyone feel a certain way about jiu-jitsu. I can't make anyone show up on a certain day of jiu-jitsu. You know, I can just control my own, what I'm doing physically and what I'm doing mentally. And people who get it will get it. And those who don't won't. But I'll give you one. This just popped into my head. I'll give you, one thing that helped me. I always felt this way, but you have moments of doubt, like, oh, am I doing this wrong? Is it working? And I was having some moments of doubt. And a couple of years ago, I got called to do a seminar at one of our newer affiliates. And he's an MMA fighter and he runs an MMA gym, but he affiliated with us for jiu-jitsu. So I don't know this guy. And he's a fighter and he's training fighters. So I don't really know what to expect. But I go and I do a seminar. And he's like, oh, do you know I joined John Frankl team? And I'm like, no, because I don't do any of that. He joined through, I have a guy who manages all the affiliations and stuff. He's like, I knew I needed jiu-jitsu because he had done sambo and stuff, and he realized that wasn't very good for, you know, he wanted to be a good grappler for MMA, and he realized he needed jiu-jitsu. He was looking for a coach, and there's a Cobrinha affiliate here, and he went to that guy, and he's like, this is just not effective for MMA, what they're teaching. And then Henner was doing a seminar here. And so he went to the Henner seminar, and I didn't even know him at this point. And this is like 2 years later, he tells me, he's like, I noticed you were at the Henner seminar. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I was at that seminar. And he's like, and you were like 4th degree black belt, and you just sat there and did everything Henner told you to do. You grabbed your partner, and you spent, it was an 8-hour day. He did like these 4 2-hour sessions. And he's like, you just sat there and you didn't say like, I do it this way, or like try to say like, oh, in my, you know, when I was learning. And he's like, you just sat there and just like learned jiu-jitsu for 8 hours. And he's like, then I realized it's like, man, I'm going to go join his team. He's got the right idea about jiu-jitsu. So like the people who are meant to get it are going to get it, and you don't know who they are and you can't control them. But I'm just out there doing what I think is natural. I'm not acting. This is how I really believe people should act and train. And then the people who get it, they're going to get it, you know?
Dude,
when is the next John Frankl East Coast US tour?
So it should be late summer once I get Anna into the dorms, you know? I'll make the rounds.
Yeah, man, we have to get you to Port City.
I'd love to.
Yeah, this time around. I know we've talked about it and we've kind of flirted with some stuff. And
no, man, it's all good. I'll be there. And I'm on sabbatical, so I have a full year. In the last sabbatical, I was in Belmont. I was training at Roberto's and training at Nate's because Anna had to be in one location to be in elementary school, but now she's going off to college. So I'm just going to be traveling for the year. I can go wherever I want, whenever I want. So it's pretty cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hopefully someday we'll take the Great Northeast BJJ podcast to visit you in Korea.
Oh, anytime, man. Korea's a blast. Yeah, the food is awesome. The people are awesome. Jiu-jitsu is good now. I mean, there's a lot of good jiu-jitsu. You guys have a great time if you ever can make it over here.
I got to try some of that soju.
Oh, dude. It will be here.
I can't not watch you. You post videos of you making it all the time, and I can't not watch. I'm like, that's going to be so good when it's done.
It's
a lot of interesting stuff. Like, do you do a lot of non-traditional soju recipes, or are you doing mostly traditional?
Fairly traditional. Yeah.
What's it come out with at the end for ABV?
It's up to me, but I usually cut it about 65%, like 130 proof. So
Holy shit!
Yeah. You can if you want more volume, then you get less ABV. But like everything off the shelf is like 80 proof, right? 40%. So I don't want to reproduce that I can buy off the shelf.
Right. That's strong.
Oh yeah, but you'd be surprised how smooth it is.
Well, and we're going to need the opportunity, so it looks like we're going to have to go to Korea.
Let's do it.
All right. Nate, thanks for coming on with us, man.
That was great.
Yeah, no, thanks for showing up, both you guys. I thought it was going to be me and George, and I'm like, that after an hour, so that could just, because what happens is like, I knew you'd have good questions, George, but I'm like, man, I don't want to be like, and then John Frankl in 2002, John Frankl did this, and in 2003, John Frankl did that, being like some egomaniac. But with you guys, it makes it much more organic. Thank you for coming on. Yeah.
Sure. I just, I want to say thanks both to you and Nate, for joining. Obviously, there's a little bit about you, John, kind of your history of jiu-jitsu and kind of your approach. But thank you guys both for coming. This is a really difficult time for a lot of people in jiu-jitsu, and both of you guys are people that I'm very proud to be part of kind of my jiu-jitsu lineage and the people that I've spent time with. And I see what you guys are doing. And when people mention your names, like I'm literally like a schoolgirl. Like I'm like a rock, fan. I'm like, oh, I know him. I know that guy. And so I'm super proud of what you guys are doing. And, you're a couple of the most honorable people I know. And I'm like really proud to kind of share your stories with everybody. And, I just hope that sometime soon we can get together personally and you guys can choke me a little bit and we can tell more stories.
Yeah, man, I feel blessed that you guys are all running schools. Like when I do wind up on the East Coast, I can just like, hey, I'm in Cambridge, boom, going to Nate's, or hey, I got a car in a little time, going to Port City. It's like, if you guys were just like working at banks or something, it'd be like, oh yeah, we email each other, but I got nowhere to train, so thanks for keeping it going over there.
Absolutely. I can't wait till this thing's over, man. It'll be exciting, for you to bring your daughter to and spend some time with you. That'll be killer.
Yeah. And well, like about COVID-19 and everything, like you said, it's Chris Howder. I mean, it's who's left. I mean, it is jiu-jitsu, right? It's boring as hell and we all want to be training. But on the other hand, it's like that idea, like who's left at the end? Like who doesn't quit? Controlling yourself. You can't really control external circumstances. So, we'll be talking 5 years from now and this will just be like, oh yeah, remember, and it'll seem short,
Right. I'm hoping that way. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. I appreciate everything. I'll see you guys all soon. Be well. Give your best to your family, my best to your families. And, John, also anybody you want to, like, do you want any website or pump or like, you know what I mean? Obviously your own jiu-jitsu school, but like,
oh no, like everything I'm doing right now is in Korea. So like, I've already said, like in terms of like worldwide resources, I think SBG, Henry Akins, Gracie Academy, in terms of like online curriculum and things that you can really follow, those three are the ones that make sense to me. And I've put time and energy and money into like Marcelo and the Mendez brothers just to see what it was. Like I wasn't just like, that's not for me. That's too narrow-minded, right? But, it just the ones that really I kept coming back to and seemed like the best technical jiu-jitsu and the best philosophical jiu-jitsu. I think those are the three that I really keep coming back to. Everything else I do is kind of local. There's no reason to plug some local yoga school in Seoul or some local kettlebell school in Seoul or anything. But yeah, they're all cool, and I'm glad they're here though.
I think maybe go check out John Frankl, BJJ, and Seoul, Korea. Maybe go train with that guy. I hear he's pretty good.
Well, fun.
Seek him out. Thanks, you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you
very much.
Later.
Be well, guys. Thank you.
guys. You too. See ya.